The moment Charlotte Vale spilled coffee on the shabby construction worker in her building's lobby, she made two terrible mistakes. First, she assumed the worn-out man holding his daughter's hand was nobody important. Second, she said it out loud, questioning whether men who couldn't provide properly should even have children. The lobby went silent. But what Charlotte didn't know as she stood there in her $1,000 suit, looking down at this stranger, was that she'd just insulted the one man in Chicago who could destroy her career with a single signature. Because the building she was standing in, he owned it, every single floor. If you want to see how this ends, stay until the final word, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The blizzard hit Chicago like a punch to the face. Mason Reed had seen worse. 32 years in this city taught you that February didn't mess around, and this particular Tuesday morning was proof. The wind came off Lake Michigan with teeth, turning ordinary snow into horizontal needles that stung any exposed skin. Cars crept along Michigan Avenue at walking speed, their hazard lights blinking uselessly through the white curtain of weather. Mason pulled his daughter closer as they walked. "Daddy, look! The snowflakes are dancing!" Ellie's voice was muffled by her scarf, but her excitement cut through the storm like a lighthouse beam. She was 6 years old and wore a puffy purple coat that made her look like a small, enthusiastic grape. The penguin hat on her head, her absolute favorite possession in the world, had ear flaps that bounced with each step. "They're moving pretty fast, Jelly Bean," Mason said, adjusting the equipment bag on his shoulder. The worn canvas was heavy with tools he probably wouldn't need today, but old habits died hard. "You warm enough?" "Uh-huh. Can we make a snowman after your meeting?" "We'll see. Meeting might run long." "But Daddy," "I said we'll see." The words came out sharper than he meant. Mason softened his tone. "Hey, eyes up front when we're walking, okay? Sidewalk's slippery." Ellie nodded and went back to narrating her observations about winter wildlife, a topic she'd become obsessed with after checking out a library book about Arctic animals. Mason let her talk. Her voice was better than silence, better than the thoughts that still crept in during quiet moments. Thoughts about Sarah, about the accident, about all the mornings that used to start with 3 people instead of 2. 3 years hadn't made it easier, just different. The Harrow Tower appeared through the snow like a glass cathedral, 43 stories of steel and money stabbing upward into the gray sky. Mason had always thought it looked out of place in this neighborhood, too new and shiny among the older buildings with actual character. But that was the point, wasn't it? Looking expensive, looking important. Looking like it didn't belong to someone wearing a patched Carhartt jacket and boots with worn-down heels. "Is this where your meeting is?" Ellie asked, stopping to stare upward. Snow collected on her eyelashes. "Yeah, kiddo, this is the place." "It's really tall." "Sure is." "Taller than our building?" Mason smiled despite himself. Their apartment building in Bridgeport was 6 stories of red brick built sometime during the Eisenhower administration. "Little bit taller than ours, yeah." "Wow." Ellie's breath fogged in the cold air. "Do important people work here? Some people probably think they're important." "Are you important?" The question caught him sideways. Mason looked down at his daughter, at her honest brown eyes and wind-chapped cheeks and that ridiculous penguin hat, and felt something crack open in his chest. "I'm important to you, aren't I?" "You're the most important," Ellie declared with the absolute certainty only a 6-year-old could muster. She grabbed his hand. "Come on, I'm cold." The revolving door fought against the wind as they pushed through, and then suddenly they were inside, and the world changed completely. Warmth hit them first, then light, so much light from the massive chandeliers that Mason had to blink. The lobby of Harrow Tower was 3 stories of polished marble, brass fixtures, and the kind of quiet that only serious money could buy. Their boots squeaked against the floor. Water dripped from Mason's jacket onto stone that probably cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. A security guard glanced their way, his expression shifting through several stages of professional assessment. Around them, the Tuesday morning rush continued like they were invisible. Men in suits that cost what Mason made in a month strode toward elevator banks, talking on phones, checking watches, radiating the particular energy of people who believed their time was worth more than other people's time. Women in heels that could double as weapons click-clacked across the marble, carrying leather portfolios and coffee cups with the Harrow Tower Cafe logo. Nobody looked directly at Mason and Ellie, but everybody saw them. You could feel it in the way conversations paused mid-sentence, in the slight adjustments of personal space, in the quick flick of eyes that registered construction worker and small child, and doesn't belong here in half a second before looking away. Mason had been on job sites his entire adult life. He knew what it looked like when people decided you were beneath them before you opened your mouth. "Daddy?" Ellie whispered. "Why is everyone dressed fancy?" "They work here, sweetheart. Different kind of work than I do." "Oh." She thought about this. "Do they build stuff?" "Not exactly." "Then what do they—" The revolving door spun again, and Charlotte Vale entered like weather. She was 30 years old and looked like someone had designed her specifically to intimidate people. Tall, sharp-featured, blonde hair pulled back so tight it could give you a headache just looking at it. Her suit was charcoal gray and perfectly tailored. Her heels added 3 inches she didn't need. She moved through the lobby like she owned it, which Mason knew she very much wanted to. She was on her phone naturally. "Don't care what Gerald thinks. The zoning variance is non-negotiable." Charlotte's voice carried across the marble with the particular accent of someone who'd grown up with money and didn't think about it anymore. "Tell him if he won't— No, tell him, Marcus, don't ask. If he won't move on the environmental review, then we'll—" She walked straight into Mason. The iced coffee in her left hand went everywhere. It hit his jacket in an explosion of cold liquid and ice cubes, splashing across the worn canvas like someone had thrown a bucket of muddy water at him. Some of it caught his neck. Drops hit Ellie's coat. The cup itself bounced off his equipment bag and clattered across the marble floor, spinning in a lazy circle before coming to rest near a potted plant. The lobby went quiet. Charlotte looked at him, really looked for the first time, and Mason watched her brain process what she was seeing. He knew exactly what she saw. A man in his early 30s with calloused hands, permanently paint-stained fingernails, a jacket that had seen better decades, and work boots that had clearly walked through actual work. A little girl beside him wearing a penguin hat and holding a children's book about animals. Working class. Poor, probably. Definitely not supposed to be in this lobby. "Oh my God," Charlotte said, but she wasn't talking to him. She was still holding her phone up to her ear. "Marcus, I'll call you back. Someone just—" She ended the call and stared at the coffee dripping from Mason's jacket. "You walked right into me." Mason blinked. "Ma'am? You weren't watching where you were going." Charlotte's voice had that special quality of people used to never being contradicted. "I was on an important call and you just—" She gestured vaguely at the space between them, as if the physical laws of motion had somehow rearranged themselves in her favor. "You ran into me," Mason said quietly. Beside him, Ellie had gone very still. "I was clearly visible. On the phone. You should have—" Charlotte stopped herself and something shifted in her expression. It wasn't quite sympathy, but it was in the neighborhood. She looked at Ellie, at the penguin hat, at the worn backpack the girl carried, then back at Mason's coffee-soaked jacket. "Look, I'm sorry about your clothes. I'm sure that jacket is— I'm sure it's fine. The coffee wasn't that hot." It was iced coffee, but Mason didn't bother pointing that out. Charlotte pulled a wallet from her purse. Leather, expensive, probably cost more than everything Mason was currently wearing combined. She extracted a $20 bill and held it out. "Here, for dry cleaning or whatever." Mason looked at the money. "I don't need—" "Please, I insist." Charlotte's tone made it clear this wasn't generosity. It was closing a transaction, making things even. She pushed the bill toward him. "Really, take it. I'm sure every little bit helps, right?" There it was, that particular phrase. Every little bit helps. The way rich people talked about poor people when they thought they were being kind. "Ma'am, I don't want your money." Mason's voice stayed level, but something underneath it had gone very cold. Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "I'm trying to do you a favor here." "I didn't ask for one." "No, but clearly—" She stopped herself again, glancing around the lobby. A few people were watching now, pretending not to. Charlotte lowered her voice, leaning in slightly. "Look, I understand this is probably embarrassing for you, but there's no need to get defensive. I'm trying to help. That jacket is obviously important to you, and I'm offering to cover the cost of—" "It's my work jacket," Mason interrupted. "It's supposed to get dirty." Charlotte straightened up. "Well, fine, but you should be more careful in places like this." Her gaze flicked to Ellie again, and something changed in her expression. Something Mason had seen before and hated every time. pity mixed with judgment. And honestly, if you're bringing your daughter to work with you, maybe you should consider whether that's really appropriate. There are programs, childcare assistants. It's not healthy for children to be dragged around to job sites all day. The marble floor might as well have cracked open. Ellie's hand tightened around Mason's. I'm not dragging her anywhere, Mason said, very quietly. I didn't mean it like that. But Charlotte's tone suggested she'd meant it exactly like that. I just think, as someone who cares about child welfare, that maybe it's worth examining whether, well, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Badly. Whether men in your position should really be taking on the responsibility of single parenthood if they can't provide the stability that children need. The lobby didn't just go quiet. It went dead silent. Someone dropped a pen. The sound of it hitting marble rang out like a gunshot. Charlotte seemed to realize too late that she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. I only meant, you don't know anything about my position. Mason's voice was still quiet, but it had edges now, sharp ones. You don't know anything about my daughter, or what I provide for her, or what stability looks like in our life. I'm just saying that statistically. You're not saying anything worth hearing. Mason squatted down to Ellie's level, keeping his eyes on her instead of Charlotte. Hey, Jellybean, you okay? Ellie nodded, but her eyes were too bright. Good. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to head upstairs, and you're going to sit in the nice lounge area and read your book about Arctic foxes. Remember the part about how they can hear mice under the snow? Uh-huh. Her voice was small. You can tell me about that after my meeting, okay? Sound good? Okay, Daddy. Mason stood back up and finally looked directly at Charlotte Vale. She was staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, part defiance, part uncertainty, like she was waiting for him to yell, like she expected anger. He didn't give her that. My daughter, Mason said, speaking slowly and clearly so every word landed exactly where he aimed it, is the smartest, kindest, most loved little girl in this city. She eats 3 meals a day. She has a warm bed, clean clothes, and more books than she can read. She goes to a good school where her teachers know her name and actually care if she learns something. She's never been left alone or forgotten or treated like she's in the way. And every single morning when she wakes up, the first thing she sees is someone who would burn this whole city down before he'd let anything hurt her. Charlotte's mouth had gone dry. Mason could see her throat move as she swallowed. So when you stand there in your $1,000 suit, Mason continued, and tell me I'm not providing stability for my kid because my jacket's got some paint stains on it, that tells me exactly one thing. It tells me you don't know a damn thing about being a parent. You don't know anything about what matters, and you sure as hell don't know anything about me. He took Ellie's hand. Come on, sweetheart, we've got a meeting to get to. Mason walked toward the executive elevator bank, the fancy ones on the right side of the lobby with the brass doors and the security panel. Charlotte watched him go, confusion replacing the defensive anger on her face. Wait, she called after him. Those elevators are restricted to... Mason pulled a keycard from his jacket pocket and scanned it. The panel beeped. The brass doors opened with a quiet hydraulic whisper. He and Ellie stepped inside. Charlotte stood in the middle of the lobby, coffee cup on the floor beside her, $20 bills still in her hand. Around her, the morning rush had resumed, people moving, talking, pretending they hadn't just witnessed that entire exchange. But they had. Everyone had. And somewhere in the back of Charlotte's mind, a small, uncomfortable thought was beginning to form. A question she didn't want to ask, but couldn't quite ignore. Who exactly was that man? Babe? The executive elevator was nothing like the regular ones. The walls were paneled in dark wood. The floor was actual marble. There was a small bench seat, because apparently standing for 40 seconds was too much to ask of important people, and a discreet brass panel listing only the top 10 floors of the building. Ellie sat on the bench, swinging her legs. The penguin hat was slightly askew from the wind earlier, and Mason reached over to straighten it. Daddy? Yeah, Jellybean? Why was that lady so mean? Mason sighed, watching the floor numbers climb. She wasn't trying to be mean, some people look at the world differently. They think certain things about certain people without checking if those things are true. Like she thought bad things about us? Something like that. But we're not bad. No, sweetheart, we're not bad. Ellie thought about this, her 6-year-old brain working through concepts that shouldn't have been her problem yet. Did you get mad? Little bit, yeah. You didn't yell, though. No, I didn't yell. How come? Mason looked at his daughter, at the serious expression on her face, the way she was trying so hard to understand the complicated, unfair rules of the adult world. Because yelling doesn't fix anything, and because I wanted that lady to really hear what I was saying. Sometimes quiet words land harder than loud ones. Oh, Ellie went back to swinging her legs. Can I still have hot chocolate after your meeting? The whiplash of being 6 years old, from philosophical questions to hot chocolate in under 10 seconds. Mason smiled despite everything. Yeah, kiddo, you can have hot chocolate. With extra marshmallows? Don't push your luck. The elevator slowed as it approached the 40th floor. Mason checked his watch. 8:47 a.m. 13 minutes until the meeting officially started, but his lawyers had asked him to arrive early. They wanted to go over some last-minute details about the sale terms, make sure he was comfortable with everything. He wasn't comfortable with any of it, actually. Selling Harrow Tower felt like selling a piece of his father. Thomas Reed had spent 40 years building his small real estate empire, not through inheritance or luck, but through brutal, unglamorous work, fixing properties other people had given up on, learning the business from the ground up, saving every dollar he could. When the cancer took him 7 years ago, he'd left everything to Mason. 4 apartment buildings, 2 commercial properties, and the crown jewel, Harrow Tower, which Thomas had bought for pennies on the dollar during the 2008 financial crisis, and held on to through every tempting offer that followed. This building will take care of you, Thomas had told Mason from his hospital bed, his voice already getting thin. But only if you take care of the people inside it first. That's the deal, son. That's always the deal. Mason had kept that promise. He'd kept the original tenants, the small businesses that couldn't afford the rent hikes other landlords demanded. He'd maintained the building properly, fixed problems quickly, treated people with basic human decency, which apparently made him some kind of anomaly in the Chicago real estate market. But keeping a 43-story building running properly cost serious money. And with Ellie getting older, needing more, deserving more, the offer from Charlotte Vale's company had started making a certain brutal sense. The elevator chimed. Floor 40. The doors opened onto a reception area that looked like someone's fantasy of what power was supposed to look like. More marble, more brass, huge windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, snow still falling outside in thick curtains. A receptionist sat behind a desk that probably cost more than a car. She looked up as Mason and Ellie stepped out. Mr. Reed, she said, standing immediately. Her smile was professional and genuine. Good morning. We weren't sure if the weather would delay you. Takes more than a little snow, Mason said. Can I get you anything? Coffee? And for your daughter, we have hot chocolate? Ellie's eyes lit up. That'd be great, thanks, Mason said. Sarah, this is my daughter, Ellie. Ellie, this is Ms. Sarah. She runs this whole floor and makes sure nothing falls apart. Sarah smiled at Ellie. I love your hat. It's a penguin, Ellie announced, as if this might not have been obvious. Penguins can swim really fast, and they eat fish, and they live where it's cold, but not too cold because Antarctic penguins are different from Arctic penguins, except there aren't any penguins in the Arctic really, because that's just the name, but she knows a lot about penguins, Mason interrupted gently. I can tell, Sarah said, delighted. Come on, I'll show you where the lounge is. We have books and puzzles, and I think someone left a stuffed polar bear in there last week. As Sarah led Ellie away chatting about Arctic animals, Mason felt his phone buzz. A text from his lawyer, David Chen. Conference room B. We're here. Charlotte Vale just arrived. She seems agitated about something. Mason typed back, Be there in 2 minutes. He took a breath, adjusted his jacket, still damp with coffee. Great. Checked his reflection in one of the brass panels and saw exactly what Charlotte Vale had seen downstairs. A working man in working clothes who looked like he'd wandered into the wrong building. The thing was, appearances weren't always wrong. Mason did work construction, had for 15 years. He'd started as a general laborer right out of high school, worked his way up to finish carpentry, and still took jobs a few times a month because he genuinely enjoyed the work. Enjoyed the simple logic of building something with his hands, of starting with raw materials and ending with something useful. The money from his properties meant he didn't have to work construction, but it kept him grounded, kept him connected to the real world where people struggled and sweated and earned their living honestly. It also, apparently, made people like Charlotte Vale think he was nobody, which was going to make the next hour very, very interesting. Mason walked down this hallway toward conference room B. Through the glass walls, he could see them gathered around the table. His legal team, Charlotte's legal team, financial advisors, the building's property manager. Charlotte herself stood at the window, phone to her ear again, gesturing sharply at something only she could see. He pushed open the door. Everyone turned. Everyone. David Chen stood immediately, relief washing over his face. Mason, thank God. We were starting to worry the snow. He stopped, noticing the coffee stains. What happened to your jacket? Long story. Are you okay? Fine. Is Ellie settled? Sarah's got her, don't worry. David lowered his voice. Listen, before we start, Charlotte's team made a last-minute push on the tenant clause. They want broader discretion on lease renewals after the sale closes. Mason's jaw tightened. We talked about this. The small businesses stay protected. I know, but they're arguing market flexibility. David, I'm on your side here. I'm just telling you what they're pushing for. At the window, Charlotte had ended her call. She turned around and finally noticed Mason standing in the doorway. Her face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, recognition, disbelief. You, she said. Me, Mason agreed. Charlotte looked at David. What is he doing here? David blinked. I'm sorry? This man, the one who... Charlotte gestured vaguely at Mason, seemingly unable to finish the sentence. What is he doing in this meeting? The room had gone very quiet. Mason stepped inside and closed the door behind him. I'm here for the same reason you are, Ms. Vale. We're selling a building. You're... Charlotte stopped. Her brain was clearly working overtime, trying to make the pieces fit. No, you can't be. The owner is Thomas Reed's estate. I've seen the paperwork. I've been negotiating with... Thomas Reed was my father, Mason said calmly. He died 7 years ago. I inherited his properties, including this one. My legal team has been representing me in the negotiations. He walked to the table and set down his equipment bag. I'm Mason Reed, and I'm the person you've been trying to buy Harrow Tower from for the last 14 months. The color drained from Charlotte's face. Around the table, lawyers and advisors shifted in their seats. A few of Charlotte's team members exchanged glances that suggested they'd just realized this meeting was about to go sideways. Charlotte's lead attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia something, cleared her throat. Mr. Reed, Ms. Vale, perhaps we should all take a moment to... No moment needed, Mason said. He pulled out a chair and sat down. Let's get started. We've got a lot to cover. Charlotte remained standing, gripping the back of her own chair like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She was staring at Mason with an expression he'd seen before, usually on people who'd just realized they'd made a very expensive mistake. You, she said again, but quieter this time. Downstairs. I thought you were a contractor? Mason offered. Someone bringing his kid to work because he couldn't afford childcare? Someone who didn't belong in your fancy building? Charlotte's mouth opened, closed. Nothing came out. Yeah, Mason said, his voice still calm, still level, but with something underneath it now, something that made everyone in the room sit up a little straighter. I heard what you thought. The whole lobby heard what you thought. Mr. Reed, I wasn't trying to. You made a lot of assumptions about me in about 30 seconds. Most of them wrong. All of them based on what I looked like instead of who I am. Mason leaned back in his chair. But here's the thing, Ms. Vale. I don't actually care what you think about me. What I care about is what you think about the people who actually live and work in this building. The same people you're going to be responsible for if this sale goes through. Charlotte finally sat down, moving carefully, like someone who just realized they were standing on ice. I want to apologize, she said. Noted. No, I mean it. What I said downstairs was completely inappropriate. I made assumptions that were unfair and cruel, and Ms. Vale, Mason's voice cut through her apology like a knife through fog. I appreciate that you feel bad about embarrassing yourself in front of a lobby full of people, but I don't need your apology right now. What I need is to know whether you're actually going to protect the tenants in this building, or whether you're just going to say whatever I want to hear until the ink dries on the contracts. The room went silent again. Charlotte's attorney, Patricia, jumped in. Mr. Reed, I can assure you our client is committed to all the terms we've negotiated. I'm not talking to you, Mason said, not taking his eyes off Charlotte. I'm talking to her, the woman who's going to own this building, The woman who, 30 minutes ago, told me I shouldn't be a parent because my jacket had paint on it. He leaned forward slightly. So I'm asking directly, Ms. Vale. When you take over Harrow Tower, what happens to the 67-year-old dry cleaner on the third floor who's been here since 1987? What happens to the family-owned bookstore that barely makes rent but serves the whole neighborhood? What happens to all the people who aren't rich enough or important enough to matter to someone like you? Charlotte's face had gone pale. They'll be protected. The tenant clause. Your team just tried to gut the tenant clause 20 minutes ago. I didn't know that. Maybe you should have. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Charlotte looked at her attorney, who suddenly became very interested in the papers in front of her. Patricia, Charlotte said quietly, did we try to change the tenant protections? Patricia hesitated. We were exploring options for market flexibility. Answer the question. Yes. We proposed broader discretion on lease renewals. Charlotte closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had shifted in her expression, something that looked almost like shame. Why wasn't I told about this? You were copied on the email this morning. I don't read every email, Charlotte snapped. Then, softer. But I should have. For something like this, I should have. She looked back at Mason. That change doesn't go through. The tenant protections stay exactly as we originally negotiated. No modifications. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue, but thought better of it. Understood. I mean it, Charlotte continued. Every small business, every long-term tenant, they stay protected. Rent increases capped at inflation. 12-month notice minimum for non-renewal. First right of refusal if we sell again. All of it. No exceptions. Mason studied her face. She meant it. He could see that much. Whether she'd keep meaning it 6 months from now, when the building was fully hers and the pressure to maximize profits started coming from her board, that was a different question. But it was a start. Okay, he said. Let's talk business. Shak. The meeting lasted 4 hours. They went through every clause, every contingency, every comma in the 200-page contract. Charlotte's team pushed on price. They wanted concessions. Mason's team pushed back. They argued about timelines, about inspection periods, about what happened if the market shifted before closing. But the tenant protection stayed locked. Charlotte had made that clear, and after her public commitment in front of everyone, backing out would have looked worse than whatever profit she might have gained. Around 12:30, they broke for lunch. The conference room emptied out as people headed to the building's executive dining room or out into the snow for food. Mason stayed behind, reviewing a section about property tax liabilities. Charlotte stayed too. They sat at opposite ends of the long table, not speaking, just reading through documents. The silence stretched out, awkward and heavy. Finally, Charlotte set down her pen. I have a daughter, she said. Mason looked up. Had, Charlotte corrected herself. I mean, I still have her, obviously. She just doesn't live with me. Her father has primary custody. I see her every other weekend and Wednesday dinners. She stared down at her papers without really seeing them. Her name is Sophie. She's 8. Mason didn't say anything. When you talked about your daughter downstairs, Charlotte continued, about how she wakes up every morning and sees someone who would burn the city down before letting anything hurt her, she swallowed. Sophie doesn't see that when she wakes up. She sees her nanny, because I'm usually already at the office by the time she gets up, even on my custody days. Why are you telling me this? I don't know. Charlotte laughed, but it was bitter. Maybe because you were right. I don't know anything about being a parent, not the way you do. I know how to pay for private schools and piano lessons and summer camps. I know how to make sure she has everything she needs materially, but the rest of it... She shook her head. I let my career eat my marriage. Then I let it eat my relationship with my daughter. And somewhere along the way, I turned into someone who looks at a man in a work jacket and assumes he's failing his kid because he doesn't wear a suit. Mason closed his folder. You want absolution or something? No, I want... Charlotte paused. I want you to know I heard you, this morning. What you said about your daughter, I heard it, and it bothered me. Not because you were wrong, because you were right, and I couldn't say the same things about myself. That's on you to fix. I know. They sat in silence for another moment. My wife died, Mason said abruptly. 3 years ago, Car accident. Black ice on the expressway, wrong place, wrong time. Ellie was 3. She barely remembers her mother now, which breaks my heart in a whole different way than the grief does. Charlotte looks stricken. I'm so sorry. I'm not telling you for sympathy. I'm telling you because you need to understand something. Mason leaned forward, his voice quiet but intense. Every single day, I wake up terrified that I'm screwing this up, that I'm not enough, that Ellie deserves better than a dad who still works construction jobs because he doesn't know how to sit still, that she needs things I can't give her, a mother, a normal family, a father who wears suits and knows how to talk to her teachers without feeling like an imposter. You're not... Let me finish. Mason held up a hand. But then I look at her, actually look, and I see a kid who's happy, who feels safe, who knows she's loved, and I realize that maybe I'm not screwing it up as bad as I think. Maybe love and presence and showing up every single day actually matters more than all the things I can't give her. He stood up, gathering his papers. So when you stand in a lobby and make assumptions about who I am based on my clothes, that's one thing. But when you question whether I should even be Ellie's father because I'm not rich enough or polished enough, Mason shook his head. That's not about me, Ms. Vale. That's about you. About what you think matters. About what you value. Charlotte sat very still. You're right. I know. No, I mean, she stood as well. You're right, and I was wrong, and I can't take back what I said, but I can try to be better. She looked him directly in the eye. The tenant protections, the small businesses, I meant what I said. They matter. I'm going to make sure they're protected. Why? Because you're right about that too. I don't see them. People like the dry cleaner, the bookstore owner, they're invisible to me. Just like you were invisible until you turned out to be someone who could affect my business deal. Charlotte's voice cracked slightly. And that's shameful. I need to do better than that. Mason studied her. Words are easy, Ms. Vale. Let's see what you actually do. He walked toward the door. Mr. Reed? Mason paused. Thank you, Charlotte said, for not destroying me in there. You could have. You probably should have. Destroying you doesn't help the people in this building, Mason said simply. Making sure you actually keep your promises does. He left her standing there, alone in the conference room, surrounded by contracts and the weight of her own reflection. Ellie was exactly where he'd left her, curled up in the lounge with her Arctic Animals book and a now cold hot chocolate. She looked up as Mason entered and immediately scrambled over. Daddy, did you know Arctic foxes can hear lemmings under the snow? They jump really high and pounce down through it. I didn't know that. It's super cool. Can we watch videos when we get home? Maybe later. Meeting's not done yet, Jellybean. We've got another couple hours. Oh? Ellie flopped dramatically into her chair. This is boring. I know, but you're being really patient and I appreciate it. Can we get pizza after? Mason smiled. We'll see. That means yes. That means maybe. That means yes, but you don't want to say yes yet. Smart kid. The afternoon session went smoother than the morning. With the tenant protections locked in and Charlotte apparently committed to keeping her word, most of the remaining issues were technical. Important, but not emotionally charged. They worked through inspection protocols, transfer timelines, what happened with existing maintenance contracts. By 4:30, they had a preliminary agreement. The lawyers would spend the next few weeks drafting the final version, but the basic structure was set. Harrow Tower would change hands in 60 days. Mason would walk away with enough money to secure Ellie's future, college fund, trust account, everything she might need. He'd keep his other properties, the ones with deeper roots in working-class neighborhoods, the ones his father had started with. And Charlotte would get her trophy building. Everyone won. Except Mason didn't feel like he'd won anything. He felt like he'd let something important slip away. As the meeting broke up and people gathered their things, Charlotte approached him one last time. Mr. Reed, may I ask you something? Sure. Why are you selling, really? She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. You clearly love this building. You protected the tenants like they were family. Your father built all this. And I've seen your financials. You don't need the money. Not desperately. So, why? Mason looked out the window at the Chicago skyline, at the snow still falling in the fading afternoon light. Because I can't be in two places at once, he said finally. I can't manage a building this size properly and also be the dad Ellie needs. And one of those things matters more than the other. Charlotte nodded slowly. She's lucky, your daughter. I'm the lucky one. No, trust me, she's lucky. They shook hands, awkward, formal. Nothing like the confrontation that had started their day. Mason collected Ellie from the lounge, bundled her back into her coat and penguin hat, and headed for the elevator. As the brass doors closed, Charlotte stood in the hallway watching them go. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact she barely called anymore, Sophie's cell. Her finger hovered over the call button. Then instead, she texted, "Hey, sweetie, I know it's not my night, but want to get dinner? Just the two of us? No work, I promise." The response came back 30 seconds later. Really? Charlotte smiled despite everything. Really? Pick the place. I'll pick you up at 6. Yes! Can we go to that pasta place I like? Absolutely. Another pause, then, "Love you, Mom." Charlotte stared at those 3 words. Words she heard too rarely, words she hadn't really earned lately, and felt something crack in her chest that had been frozen solid for longer than she wanted to admit. "Love you too, baby. See you soon." She put the phone away and stood there in the empty hallway of the building she was about to own, thinking about a man in a coffee-stained work jacket who understood things she'd spent her whole life being too busy to learn. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, something small but significant had shifted, and neither of them knew yet whether that shift would hold or crack under pressure. But for now, in this moment, it was enough. The pasta restaurant Sophie picked was loud, crowded, and nowhere Charlotte would normally choose. Red-checked tablecloths, breadsticks in plastic baskets, waiters who yelled across the dining room to each other in Italian that was probably fake. The kind of place that served portions big enough to feed a family and didn't care if you showed up in jeans. Charlotte hated it immediately. Sophie loved it. "Can I get the fettuccine Alfredo with extra chicken and garlic bread? Oh, and can we get mozzarella sticks for the table?" Sophie barely paused for breath, her 8-year-old enthusiasm running at full speed. She'd been talking non-stop since Charlotte picked her up, filling the silence with stories about school and her best friend Maya and the science project they were building about volcanoes. "Whatever you want, sweetie," Charlotte said, and watched her daughter's eyes go wide. "Really? Because last time you said I had to get something with vegetables. Tonight's different. How come?" Charlotte didn't have a good answer for that. How did you explain to an 8-year-old that you'd spent your day being confronted with what a terrible parent you'd become? That some stranger in a construction jacket had held up a mirror you'd been avoiding for years? "Just felt like being spontaneous," Charlotte said instead. Sophie narrowed her eyes. She had her mother's skepticism, apparently. "Are you sick?" "No." "Did something bad happen?" "No, baby, I just—" Charlotte stopped herself before the usual excuses could tumble out. The reflexive explanations about work being crazy, about how busy things were, about how this was temporary and everything would slow down soon. Lies she'd been telling for so long, she almost believed them herself. "I just missed you. Wanted to spend time together." "Oh." Sophie processed this, then her face split into a grin that made Charlotte's chest hurt. "Okay. Can we go to the bookstore after? There's a new series about dragons that Maya says is really good." "Absolutely." The waiter came, a college kid with an accent that definitely wasn't Italian, and took their order. Sophie got her fettuccine with extra everything. Charlotte ordered something she didn't care about and wouldn't finish. When the kid left, Sophie leaned forward conspiratorially. "Mom, you seem weird." "Weird how?" "I don't know. Different, like happy, but also sad. It's confusing." Out of the mouths of babes. "I had a strange day," Charlotte admitted. "Met someone who made me think about things." "What kind of things?" "Important things. About being a mom. About whether I'm doing it right." Sophie's expression shifted, something older and more careful sliding across her features. The kind of look that meant she'd thought about this before. Probably a lot. "You mean like how you're always working?" The words hit like a slap. "Yeah," Charlotte said quietly. "Like that. Dad says you work hard because you care about doing a good job." "That's nice of him to say. But I think—" Sophie hesitated, picking at the paper wrapper on her straw. "I think maybe you work hard because it's easier than being home?" Charlotte froze. 8 years old. Her daughter was 8 years old and had already figured out what Charlotte's therapist had been gently suggesting for the last 2 years. That's pretty smart, Charlotte managed. Maya's mom says I'm perceptive. Is that good? It's very good, sometimes painfully good. Charlotte reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. Sophie, I'm sorry for not being around more, for choosing work over you so many times. You deserve better than that. Sophie shrugged, trying to play it casual, but Charlotte could see the emotion underneath. It's okay. It's not okay. But I want to try to do better. Will you help me? How? By telling me when I'm screwing up, by calling me out when I'm choosing my phone over you, by... Charlotte had to stop because her voice was getting thick. By not letting me disappear into work so much that I forget what actually matters. Sophie squeezed her hand. Okay, Mom. I can do that. Thank you, baby. The mozzarella sticks arrived, greasy and perfect. Sophie grabbed one immediately, stretching the cheese into long strings and laughing when it got on her chin. Charlotte watched her daughter, really watched, not the distracted half-attention she usually managed between email checks, and thought about Mason Reed and his little girl in the penguin hat. You would burn the city down before letting anything hurt her. When was the last time Charlotte had felt that kind of fierce protectiveness? When had she last put Sophie first without calculating the cost to her career? Her phone buzzed. Work email. Some crisis that her assistant thought needed immediate attention. Sophie noticed, her laughter fading slightly. Charlotte pulled out her phone, looked at the screen, then did something she'd never done before. She powered it completely off and put it in her purse. Mom, what are you doing? Being present, Charlotte said. Now tell me more about this volcano project. Sophie's smile could have powered the whole city. Across town, Mason and Ellie were having their own dinner, deep dish pizza from Lou Malnati's, eaten straight from the box at their tiny kitchen table. Their apartment in Bridgeport wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, bathroom that needed updating, kitchen with appliances older than Mason. But it was home. It was theirs. Daddy, can I ask you something? Ellie had tomato sauce on her nose. Shoot. Why did that lady make you sad today? Mason paused mid-bite. He'd hoped they'd gotten through the day without having to really unpack what happened in the lobby. Should have known better. I wasn't sad, Jellybean, just frustrated. What's frustrated mean? It means when something bothers you but you can't fix it right away. Was it because she was mean about me? She wasn't mean about you specifically. She just... How did you explain class prejudice to a 6-year-old? She made some wrong guesses about our family based on what I was wearing. That's dumb. Yeah, it kind of is. Ellie chewed thoughtfully. Her jacket was really nice, though. All smooth and pretty, not like yours. My jacket's practical. I like your jacket. It smells like sawdust and that citrus soap you use. Mason smiled despite himself. Thanks, kid. And it has lots of pockets for stuff. That's true. Can I have a jacket with lots of pockets when I'm big? You can have whatever kind of jacket you want. Ellie seemed satisfied with this answer and went back to her pizza. Mason watched her eat, this small person who'd somehow become the entire center of his universe. 3 years since Sarah died. 3 years of figuring out how to be both parents at once, of making mistakes and fixing them, of lying awake at night terrified he was damaging her in ways he couldn't see. But she was happy, wasn't she? She was doing okay in school, had friends, loved reading and animals and asking 9 million questions about everything. She didn't have nightmares anymore like she did that first year, didn't ask when mommy was coming home. That was progress. That was something. So why did Charlotte Vale's words still sting? Because doubt was poison. Once it got in, it spread. And now Mason was second-guessing everything. Should he have enrolled Ellie in more activities? Did she need therapy? Was he supposed to be doing more to preserve Sarah's memory, or was it healthier to let her fade naturally? Should he sell more properties, work less, be around more? Or was working construction actually good because it taught Ellie about honest labor and not being ashamed of getting your hands dirty? Daddy, you look weird. Just thinking. About the lady? Yeah? Are you going to sell her the building? Mason blinked. How do you know about that? I heard you talking to Mr. Chen in the lounge. I wasn't eavesdropping, she added quickly. I was just sitting there and you guys were kind of loud. We're selling the building, yeah. How come? Because it's really big and takes a lot of work to manage, and I want to spend more time with you. Ellie absorbed this. Is it because of Grandpa Thomas? What do you mean? You always get sad when you talk about Grandpa Thomas's buildings. Smart kid. Too smart sometimes. I miss him, Mason said simply. Selling the tower feels like I'm letting go of something he worked really hard for. But he gave it to you, so now it's yours and you can decide what to do with it, right? That's actually exactly right. Then it's okay. Grandpa Thomas would want you to be happy. Ellie said this with such absolute certainty that Mason had to look away before she saw his eyes getting wet. Yeah, Jellybean. He would. They finished their pizza in comfortable silence. Afterward, Ellie wanted to watch videos about Arctic foxes, so they curled up on the couch together with Mason's laptop balanced on a cushion. She fell asleep halfway through the third video, her head heavy against his shoulder, her breathing deep and even. Mason stayed still, not wanting to wake her. Outside, the snow had finally stopped, but the streets were buried under nearly 8 inches. He'd have to shovel in the morning, maybe take Ellie to the park if the wind died down, let her build a snowman like she'd asked about. Normal things, small things, the things that actually mattered. His phone buzzed. David Chen texting an update about the contract revisions. Mason skimmed it one-handed, careful not to disturb Ellie. Everything looked fine. Standard stuff. Charlotte's team had backed off the tenant clause modifications completely, which was good. Surprising, but good. Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. Mr. Reed, this is Charlotte Vale. I got your number from the contract file. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to apologize again for this morning. Not the business apology, a real one. What I said about you and your daughter was unforgivable. I've been thinking about it all day and I'm genuinely sorry. Mason stared at the message. He should probably ignore it, or send back something brief and professional. Keep the boundaries clear. Instead he typed, apology accepted. Focus on keeping the tenant protections in place. That's what matters. The response came fast. I will. I promise. And thank you for not making today worse than it had to be. Not interested in making things worse, just interested in making sure the right thing happens. That's fair. Can I ask you something? Mason hesitated, then, sure. How do you do it? Balance everything? Your daughter, your work, your properties. You made it look easy today, but I know it can't be. It's not easy. I screw up constantly, but I prioritize. Ellie comes first. Everything else fits around that. I'm trying to learn how to do that with my daughter. It's harder than it should be. It's hard for everyone. But you showed up tonight, right? That's a start. There was a long pause before the next message. How did you know I was with my daughter tonight? Lucky guess. You had that look people get when they're trying to change something. What look? Determined, but scared. Another pause. That's exactly how I feel. Then you're on the right track. Thank you, Mr. Reed. Mason. And you're welcome. He put the phone down and looked at Ellie, still fast asleep against his shoulder. She drooled a little on his shirt. Her penguin hat was on the floor where it had fallen. One of her socks was halfway off. Messy. Imperfect. Real. He wouldn't trade it for anything. The next morning came too early. Mason's alarm went off at 5:30. He had a small renovation job across town at 7 and needed to drop Ellie at school first. She groaned when he woke her, burrowing deeper into her blankets like a hibernating bear. 5 more minutes, she mumbled. You said that 10 minutes ago. Then 10 more minutes. Doesn't work that way, Jellybean. Come on, up and at 'em. She sat up slowly, her hair sticking out in every direction. I don't want to go to school. You love school. Not today. Today I want to stay home and build a snow fort. Weekend. We'll build the best snow fort ever this weekend. Promise? Promise. Now get dressed. I'll make breakfast. Breakfast was scrambled eggs and toast, eaten standing up while Mason packed Ellie's lunch and checked his tool bag. The morning routine was so ingrained it was almost automatic. Wake up, get Ellie moving, breakfast, teeth, coat, backpack, out the door by 6:45. They made it by 6:43, which felt like a personal victory. The drive to Ellie's school took 15 minutes in good traffic, 20 in bad. Today was somewhere in between. The main roads had been plowed, but the side streets were still a mess. Mason's truck handled it fine. 4-wheel drive and good tires made Chicago winters manageable, but he took it slow anyway. Ellie was quiet in the passenger seat, staring out at the snow-covered city. You okay? Mason asked. Yeah. You sure? You seem thoughtful. I was just thinking about yesterday, about the tower. and the meeting and everything. What about it? Do you think that lady will be nice to the people in the building, the ones you were protecting? Mason glanced at his daughter. I think she'll try. Whether she succeeds is a different question. What if she doesn't? Then the contract has rules that force her to. That's why we have lawyers. Lawyers are boring. They're useful boring. Ellie giggled at that. Mr. Chen seems nice, though. He gave me stickers. He's good people. They pulled up to the school, a solid brick building that had probably looked modern in 1965 and now just looked sturdy. Kids were streaming in through the main entrance, bundled in winter coats and carrying backpacks nearly as big as they were. Mason walked Ellie to the door like he did every morning. She was getting to the age where some kids didn't want their parents around, but she still grabbed his hand without hesitation. Love you, Daddy. Love you too, Jellybean. Have a good day. Learn something cool. I'll try. She ran inside, her backpack bouncing. Mason watched until she disappeared into the hallway, then headed back to his truck. The renovation job was straightforward, replacing kitchen cabinets in a condo in Lincoln Park. The homeowner was a lawyer named Stevens, who'd hired Mason based on a recommendation from another client. He wanted craftsman-style cabinets, nothing fancy but done right. Mason could do right. He spent the morning carefully removing the old cabinets, making notes about the wall condition, checking for any electrical or plumbing issues that might complicate the install. It was methodical work that required attention, but left his mind free to wander, and it kept wandering back to Charlotte Vale. He couldn't figure her out. The woman in the lobby had been exactly what he expected from a wealthy CEO, dismissive, presumptuous, completely blind to her own privilege. But the woman in the conference room, especially toward the end of the meeting, had seemed genuinely rattled by her own behavior. And those text messages last night. People didn't usually surprise Mason anymore. He'd spent enough years in construction to know that most folks were pretty predictable once you understood what motivated them. Money, usually. Or pride. Sometimes fear. But Charlotte felt different. Like she was genuinely trying to figure out who she was supposed to be, and failing, and maybe starting to care about the failure. Which wasn't his problem. He needed to remember that. His job was to sell the building, protect the tenants through the contract terms, and walk away. What Charlotte did after that, whether she kept her promises or found legal loopholes to squeeze more profit, that would be on her conscience, not his. Around noon, Mason's phone rang. David Chen. Hey David, what's up? Got the revised contract from Charlotte's team. They've accepted all our terms. No pushback on the tenant clause, no games with the inspection period, nothing. It's clean. Mason paused mid-measurement. Seriously? Seriously, I'm actually a little suspicious. I've never seen Vale Industries fold this easily on anything. Maybe she meant what she said. Maybe. Or maybe she's playing a longer game we're not seeing yet. David sighed. Either way, if you're comfortable with these terms, we can move to final drafting. Have everything ready to sign in about 3 weeks. 3 weeks until Harrow Tower wasn't his anymore. 3 weeks until he cut the last major tie to his father's legacy. Yeah, Mason said, let's do it. You sound thrilled. It's the right call. For Ellie. That's what matters. Okay, I'll start the paperwork. Oh, and Mason, for what it's worth, your dad would be proud of you. You fought for those tenants. You made sure they'd be protected. That's what he cared about. Mason's throat went tight. Thanks, David. After hanging up, he stood in the half-demolished kitchen and let himself feel it. The grief, the guilt, the relief. All of it mixing together into something he couldn't quite name. His father had bought Harrow Tower in 2008, right after the financial crisis when properties were selling for nothing. Thomas Reed had seen potential where everyone else saw risk. He'd held on to it through the recovery, through years of slow appreciation, building equity while more aggressive investors flipped and churned and crashed. And now Mason was selling it to someone who'd probably never held a hammer in her life. But Thomas hadn't built that empire for it to become a burden. He'd built it so Mason would have options, would have security, would be able to take care of his family without having to sacrifice everything else. Selling was honoring that intention, even if it hurt like hell. Mason's phone rang again. Different number this time, not one he recognized. Hello? Mr. Reed, this is Patricia Weinstein, Miss Vale's attorney. Do you have a moment? Mason's guard went up immediately. What do you need? Ms. Vale would like to meet with you, privately, not through legal teams. She has a proposal she'd like to discuss. What kind of proposal? She didn't share details with me, actually, just asked me to arrange a meeting if you're willing. Tomorrow, perhaps? Lunch? Every instinct Mason had said this was a bad idea. Private meetings led to handshake deals that weren't in contracts, to pressure, to complications. Why can't this go through normal channels? I asked the same thing. Ms. Vale said it wasn't about the building sale. It was about something else, something personal. Patricia's voice carried a note of confusion, like this was unusual for her client. I'm as surprised as you are, Mr. Reed, but she was insistent. Something personal. Mason thought about those text messages, about Charlotte's admission that she barely knew her own daughter, about the look on her face in the conference room when he'd talked about being a parent. Tomorrow's tough. I've got jobs scheduled. Thursday? Thursday works. Noon, okay? I'll send you the details. Thank you, Mr. Reed. After she hung up, Mason stood there holding his phone, wondering what exactly he'd just agreed to. Thursday arrived faster than expected. The location Patricia sent was a small cafe in Wicker Park. Nowhere fancy, nowhere businesslike. Just a neighborhood spot with good sandwiches and better coffee. Charlotte was already there when Mason arrived, sitting at a corner table away from the windows. She'd dressed down from her usual CEO armor, jeans, a sweater, minimal makeup. She looked younger, more uncertain. Mr. Reed, thank you for coming. It's Mason, and you're welcome. He sat down across from her. Your attorney said this wasn't about the building. It's not. It's about... Charlotte stopped, seeming to gather herself. It's about parenting, and I need advice. Mason blinked. From me? You're doing something right. I saw it with your daughter, the way she looks at you, the way she trusts you completely, and I want... Her voice cracked slightly. I want my daughter to look at me like that, but I don't know how to get there from where I am now. Charlotte, please, I know this is weird. I know I have no right to ask you for anything after how I behaved, but I spent 2 hours with Sophie on Tuesday night, and it was the best time I've had with her in months, maybe years, and I realized I don't actually know how to be her mother. Not really, not in the ways that count. The waiter appeared, breaking the moment. They ordered sandwiches neither would eat, coffee they both needed. When he left, Charlotte continued. My ex-husband has primary custody because when we divorced, I was working 80-hour weeks and genuinely believed I couldn't cut back. The court looked at our schedules and made the obvious choice. And I told myself it was fine because Sophie had everything she needed. Good school, nice house, nanny who actually cared about her. But, Mason prompted, but she doesn't have me. Not in any meaningful way. I show up for my custody time and I'm already thinking about work, about the next meeting, the next deal, and she knows it. She's 8 years old and she can already tell when I'm not really present. So be present. I don't know how. Charlotte's honesty was painful to watch. I've spent 15 years building a career where being available 24/7 is the baseline expectation, where taking a real day off is seen as weakness, and I bought into all of it. Told myself the sacrifice was worth it because I was building something important. Was it? Building something important? Yeah, maybe, but I lost everything else in the process. My marriage, my relationship with my daughter, most of my friends. She laughed bitterly. I have 700 contacts in my phone and I can't remember the last time I called someone just to talk. Mason sipped his coffee, thinking about how to respond. You know I'm not a therapist, right? I have a therapist. She tells me all the clinical things I'm supposed to do, set boundaries, practice mindfulness, schedule quality time. Charlotte shook her head. But that's not what I saw with you and Ellie. You weren't scheduling quality time. You were just there, fully there. How do you do that? Practice, and deciding it matters more than anything else. But your work fits around her, not the other way around. Mason set down his cup. Look, I'm not some perfect parent. I mess up constantly. Last week I forgot about her school play rehearsal, and she had to wait an hour for me to pick her up. Made her miss snack time with her friends. She cried the whole drive home. What did you do? Apologized, admitted I screwed up, promised to do better, and then I actually put all her school stuff in my calendar with alerts so it doesn't happen again. That's it? That's it. Being a parent isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up, admitting when you fail, and trying harder next time. Mason leaned forward. But here's the thing, Charlotte. You can't do this halfway. You can't decide to be more present with Sophie while still treating your work like it's the center of the universe. Something has to give. My career, you mean? Maybe. Or maybe just your relationship with your career. The idea that you have to be available every second, that you can't delegate, that your worth is measured in closed deals and profit margins. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. I don't know who I am without that. Then maybe it's time to find out. Their sandwiches arrived. They ate in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Charlotte spoke again. Can I ask you something else? When your wife died, how did you handle it? With Ellie, I mean. How did you keep going? Mason hadn't expected that question. I didn't have a choice. She needed me, so I figured it out. But weren't you terrified? Every single day. Still am, sometimes. He set down his sandwich. Right after Sarah died, I was convinced I'd break Ellie somehow, that I'd mess her up so badly she'd need therapy for the rest of her life. Every decision felt impossible. Every mistake felt catastrophic. What changed? Nothing, really. I'm still terrified, still convinced I'm doing it wrong half the time. Mason smiled slightly. But Ellie's happy, she's healthy, she knows she's loved, and I realize that's actually enough. Not perfect, but enough. Charlotte nodded slowly, processing this. I want that with Sophie, the enough part, the part where she knows she's loved without question. Then start showing her, not with stuff or expensive activities, just time, real, undivided attention. Figure out what she cares about and care about it too. She likes dragons and books, and this girl Maya from school who apparently knows everything about science. Then read dragon books together, ask about Maya, show up for science fairs. Mason shrugged. It's not complicated. It's just hard because it requires you to put her needs above your comfort zone. You make it sound simple. Simple and easy aren't the same thing. They finished their lunch talking about smaller things. Chicago winters, good pizza places, the general chaos of raising kids in a city. Charlotte asked about Ellie's school, about what 6-year-olds were into these days. Mason asked about Sophie, about what she was like, what made her laugh. And somewhere in that conversation, something shifted. They weren't CEO and building owner anymore. They were just two parents trying to figure out impossible things. When they left the cafe, Charlotte walked him to his truck. Thank you, she said, for meeting with me, for being honest. Good luck with Sophie. I'm going to need it. Charlotte hesitated. The building sale. You're sure about it? I'm sure. Because if you're having second thoughts, I'm not. It's time. Just take care of the people inside it. I will. I promise. Mason believed her, which was either wisdom or wishful thinking. He wasn't sure which. He drove back across the city thinking about Charlotte Vale and how people could change when they finally got desperate enough, when the cost of staying the same became higher than the pain of transformation. He hoped she made it, hoped she figured out how to be the mother Sophie needed, but that was her journey. His was waiting at home in a purple coat and penguin hat, ready to tell him everything she'd learned about Arctic foxes that day. And honestly, that was all the journey he needed. 2 weeks before the closing date, Charlotte called an emergency board meeting. Her CFO, Richard Brennan, looked like he'd swallowed something sour when she walked into the conference room. The rest of the board members wore variations of the same expression, confusion mixed with irritation at being summoned on short notice. This better be important, Richard said, not bothering with pleasantries. I canceled a golf game. It's important. Charlotte took her seat at the head of the table, her hands folded in front of her. No notes, no presentation deck, just her and a decision she'd been wrestling with for days. I want to revise our management strategy for Harrow Tower. We already have a strategy, Richard said. Maximize revenue per square foot, phase out underperforming tenants, bring in higher value leases. Standard procedure for a property acquisition of this size. I want to change that. The room went quiet. Change it how? This from Elena Vasquez, the board member who actually gave a damn about things beyond quarterly reports. She was watching Charlotte with interest. I want to keep the tenant protection clauses active indefinitely, not just during the transition period, but permanently. No forced lease non-renewals for small businesses. Rent increases capped at inflation. First right of refusal if we ever sell again. Richard actually laughed. You're joking. I'm not. Charlotte, those protections were negotiation points. They got Reed to sign. They served their purpose. But keeping them active long term, we'd be leaving millions on the table. I know. Then why would we? Because I made a promise. Charlotte's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath it. And because it's the right thing to do. Richard exchanged glances with two other board members, Thompson and Liu, the ones who always voted as a bloc. The right thing, he repeated slowly, is to maximize shareholder value. That's literally our fiduciary duty. Our duty is to run a sustainable business that doesn't destroy people's lives in pursuit of short-term profits. Oh, here we go. Richard leaned back in his chair. Let me guess. You had some kind of revelation, found your conscience, decided that maybe grinding tenants for every dollar isn't worth the karmic cost? Something like that, yeah. Well, that's touching, really. But unless you've forgotten, this company answers to shareholders who expect returns, not warm feelings. Elena cut in before Charlotte could respond. Richard, let her finish. Charlotte, what exactly are you proposing? Charlotte pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it to the center of the table. I had our finance team run the numbers. If we maintain current tenant mix and implement the protection clauses permanently, we still see a 12% annual return on the Harrow Tower investment. Not the 18% we projected with tenant turnover and rent optimization, but still solid. 12% is garbage in this market, Richard said. 12% is sustainable, and it doesn't require displacing 47 small businesses and 200 working-class residents. Thompson spoke up, his voice cold. Ms. Vale, I appreciate your newfound social consciousness, but we didn't invest $340 million to run a charity. We invested to make money. And we will make money, just not obscene amounts of it. There's no such thing as obscene amounts of money, Richard shot back. There's profitable and unprofitable. And what you're proposing is leaving $20 million on the table over the next 5 years. What I'm proposing, Charlotte said, her voice hardening, is building a business that doesn't require us to be assholes to succeed. The room erupted. 3 board members started talking at once. Richard was on his feet, face red. Only Elena and 2 others, Carter and Mendoza, stayed quiet, watching the chaos with careful expressions. Charlotte let them yell for about 30 seconds before she stood up. Enough! Her voice cut through the noise like a blade. Sit down, Richard. I will not sit down. Something in her tone made him comply, though he looked furious about it. Charlotte remained standing, her hands flat on the table. I understand your concerns, I do, but here's what you need to understand. I made a promise to Mason Reed, not a contract clause, not a negotiating tactic, a promise. And if we break that promise the second the ink dries, we're not just screwing over a bunch of tenants. We're destroying any credibility this company has. Credibility with who? Thompson demanded. A bunch of dry cleaners and bookstores? With anyone who might trust us in the future. With regulators who are already watching real estate companies for predatory practices. With the media that would love a story about a CEO who lied to a widowed father to steal his building. Charlotte let that sink in. Because, make no mistake, that's exactly how it would play if we renege on these protections. Mason Reed isn't some anonymous seller we can screw over quietly. People know him, respect him, and if we betray him, it will cost us a hell of a lot more than $20 million over 5 years. Elena nodded slowly. She has a point. She has sentiment, Richard countered, which is not the same as strategy. It's both. Charlotte sat back down. Look, I'm not asking us to run the building at a loss. I'm asking us to run it responsibly, to prove that profitable and ethical aren't mutually exclusive. And if that's not acceptable to this board, then maybe I'm not the right CEO for this company. Dead silence. Charlotte had just put her job on the line and everyone knew it. Carter, who'd been quiet until now, cleared his throat. Are you actually threatening to resign if we don't approve this? I'm saying I can't lead a company that operates this way anymore, so yes. If the board votes to override the tenant protections, I'll step down. Richard's eyes gleamed. He'd been trying to push Charlotte out for years, seeing her as too cautious, too concerned with optics. This was the opening he'd been waiting for. Well then, let's put it to a vote. All in favor of maintaining the tenant protections as Charlotte has proposed? Elena's hand went up immediately. Then Mendoza. Carter hesitated, then raised his hand too. 3 votes. Richard, Thompson, Liu, and 2 others, Fredericks and Park, kept their hands down. 5 against, 3-4. Charlotte had lost. Looks like we have our answer, Richard said, barely hiding his satisfaction. The protections get phased out as originally planned, and Charlotte, wait. This from Park, a quiet woman in her 60s who rarely spoke during meetings but carried significant weight when she did. I want to hear more about the reputational risk. Charlotte, you mentioned media exposure, regulatory scrutiny. Walk me through that. Charlotte took a breath, reorganizing her thoughts. The current political climate is hostile to corporate real estate. There are 3 bills working through the Illinois legislature right now targeting tenant displacement. The Chicago Tribune just ran a series on gentrification and predatory landlords. And Mason Reed, whether we like it or not, is sympathetic. Working-class father, veteran building owner, respected in the community. If we force out his protected tenants after promising not to, we become the villain in a very public story. That's speculation, Richard said. It's risk assessment, which is literally what you pay me to do. Charlotte pulled up something on her tablet and projected it onto the screen. This is a report from our PR firm. They've been monitoring sentiment around the Harrow Tower acquisition. Local news is already interested. Community organizations are watching. And Reed himself has relationships with at least 2 city council members who've been looking for ammunition against corporate landlords. Park studied the projection. You're saying this could become political? I'm saying it already is political. We just haven't acknowledged it yet. Richard waved dismissively. So we hire better PR, spin it as modernization, economic development. This isn't complicated. You can't spin destroying someone's livelihood. This from Elena, her voice sharp. I've been on the receiving end of that kind of displacement. My parents owned a small grocery in Pilsen, got pushed out when their building sold to developers. It destroyed them. Financially, emotionally. Also, some company could build luxury condos that sat empty for 2 years. That's unfortunate, Richard said, sounding anything but sympathetic. But it's also how markets work. Markets work, Elena countered, because people believe the system has some basic fairness built into it. When it doesn't, when it becomes purely extractive, people stop participating. They protest. They vote for regulations. They make life very difficult for companies like ours. Park was nodding. She's right. We're already seeing backlash across the industry. Rent control proposals, tenant unions. If we contribute to that backlash unnecessarily, she paused. Richard, what's the actual cost if we maintain these protections? Not the opportunity cost. The real financial impact. Richard looked annoyed but pulled up his own numbers. If we keep current tenants and honor the protection clauses, we project $41 million in revenue over 5 years instead of $61 million. That's a $20 million gap. And our total portfolio revenue projection? Approximately $890 million over the same period. Park did the math visibly. So we're arguing about 2% of our total revenue stream. $20 million is $20 million. $20 million, Park said slowly, is not worth the regulatory and reputational risk Charlotte's describing. Not even close. She looked around the table. I'm changing my vote. I support maintaining the protections. 4 votes now. Richard's confidence wavered. Thompson? Lou? You can't seriously be considering… Thompson cut him off. Actually, I am. Park's right about the risk-reward calculation. 2% of revenue is not worth potential regulatory blowback. He raised his hand. I support Charlotte's proposal. 5 votes. Liu held out for another few seconds, then sighed and raised her hand too. Fine, but I want quarterly reviews of the building's performance. If this tanks our return significantly, we revisit. Agreed, Charlotte said quickly, before anyone could change their minds. Richard looked like he wanted to flip the table. This is a mistake. You're all letting sentiment cloud your judgment. Or, Elena said calmly, we're making a strategic decision that balances profit with sustainability. Novel concept, I know. The meeting adjourned with Richard storming out and the others filing after him in various states of satisfaction or concern. Elena lingered behind with Charlotte. That was dangerous, Elena said quietly. Putting your job on the line like that. I know. Worth it? Charlotte thought about Sophie, about the last 2 weeks of actually showing up for dinner, for bedtime stories, for the small moments she'd been missing for years, about the way her daughter had hugged her last night and said, I like this version of you better, Mom. Yeah, Charlotte said. It was worth it. Elena smiled. Good. Because Richard's going to come for you eventually. You know that, right? Let him. I'll be ready. After Elena left, Charlotte sat alone in the conference room and pulled out her phone. She scrolled to Mason's number, the one she'd texted 2 weeks ago. Started typing a message. We're keeping the protections, permanently. Board approved it today. She stared at the text for a long moment, then deleted it. This wasn't something to handle over text. She'd tell him at the closing, let him hear it directly. Instead, she opened her calendar and blocked out Friday afternoon. Sophie had a volleyball game. Charlotte had never been to one of her games before. Always too busy. Always a conflict. Not this time. Mason spent the 2 weeks before closing trying not to think about what came next. He finished the Lincoln Park renovation, started a bathroom remodel in Andersonville, picked up Ellie from school every day at 3:15. Normal life, regular routine. Except underneath it all was this awareness that everything was about to change. Harrow Tower had been part of his identity for 7 years. Thomas Reed's son, the guy who owned that fancy building downtown but still worked with his hands. It made him different, gave him a kind of dual citizenship in Chicago, working-class credentials with unexpected resources. After the sale, he'd just be another small-time landlord with a few properties in Bridgeport, which was fine. Good, even. Simpler. So why did it feel like losing something irreplaceable? Daddy, you're doing it again, Ellie said from the back seat. Doing what? That thing where you stare at nothing and your face goes all weird? My face doesn't go weird. Does too. You get these little wrinkles right here. She pointed at her own forehead. And you look sad. Mason glanced at her in the rearview mirror. I'm not sad, Jellybean, just thinking. About Grandpa Thomas's building? The kid didn't miss anything. Yeah, about the building. Are you scared about selling it? Not scared, just... It's a big change. But changes can be good, right? That's what you told me when Mrs. Patterson left our school and we got Mr. Rodriguez instead. Did I say that? Yep. You said sometimes changes feel bad, but then they turn out okay. Mason smiled despite himself. You remember everything I say, don't you? Most things, except when you tell me to clean my room. I forget that a lot. Convenient. They were heading to Mason's lawyer's office for a final contract review. David had wanted Mason to go through everything one more time before the closing, make sure there were no surprises. Ellie was coming along because her after-school program had been canceled, some kind of staff training day. David's office was in a converted loft in West Loop. Exposed brick, industrial windows, the kind of space that tried very hard to look casually expensive. Mason had always felt slightly out of place there, but David never seemed to notice or care. Mason and Miss Ellie, David came out of his office smiling. How's my favorite client and her awesome dad? Ellie giggled. I'm not your client, Daddy is. You're right, but you're definitely my favorite visitor. Come on, I've got that coloring book you liked last time. While David got Ellie settled in the conference room with art supplies, Mason followed him to his office. So, David said, closing the door. We're 2 weeks out. How are you feeling? Like I'm about to make either the smartest or dumbest decision of my life. That's specific. Mason sat down heavily. I keep second-guessing everything. The price, the timeline, whether Charlotte's actually going to honor the tenant protections. About that, David pulled out a document. I got something interesting this morning. Amendment to the acquisition agreement. Charlotte's team sent it over. Mason's stomach dropped. What kind of amendment? The good kind, actually. She wants to make the tenant protection clauses permanent, not just for the transition period, but indefinitely. Rent caps, renewal protections, everything. And she wants it in writing, filed with the county, so her own company can't override it later without a formal legal process. Mason stared at him. She wants to limit her own ability to change the terms? Apparently, I've never seen anything like it. Most buyers try to weaken these clauses. She's strengthening them and locking herself in. David slid the document across. I already had our team review it. It's legit, no catches. She's essentially giving those tenants permanent protected status. Why would she do that? No idea. But it's in your favor, so I'm not questioning it too hard. Mason read through the amendment slowly. The language was clear, comprehensive, and exactly what he'd hoped for when negotiating the original deal. Better, even. Charlotte Vale was actually keeping her promise. You want me to approve this? Mason asked. If you're comfortable with it. It doesn't change anything else about the sale. Price, timeline, inspection rights, just adds this permanent layer of tenant protection. Then yeah, approve it. David made a note. Done. Anything else worrying you? About 1,000 things, but nothing we can fix with paperwork. That's parenthood, buddy. Constant low-level anxiety about everything. David smiled. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Your dad built that empire so you'd have security. You're converting it into actual security for Ellie. That's what he would have wanted. You sound pretty sure about that. I knew Thomas for 15 years. He talked about you constantly, about making sure you'd be okay, that you'd have options, that you wouldn't have to struggle like he did. David's expression turned serious, but he also talked about not wanting the business to become a burden, not wanting you to sacrifice your life managing properties because you felt obligated to keep his legacy intact. He wanted you to be free to choose. Mason's throat felt tight. He said that? Many times. Usually after a few beers at that Irish place he liked in Bridgeport. David stood up. Point is, selling Harrow Tower isn't betraying him. It's using his gift the way it was meant to be used, to give you and Ellie a better life. They wrapped up the review and collected Ellie from the conference room. She'd drawn an elaborate picture of a penguin standing on top of a skyscraper. That's Harrow Tower, she announced proudly. And that's Percy the penguin. He's the mayor of all the buildings. Percy's doing a good job, David said seriously. Very authoritative stance. On the drive home, Mason felt something shift inside him. Not quite peace. That seemed too strong a word. But maybe acceptance. Charlotte was keeping her promises. The tenants would be protected. Ellie would have the security she needed, and Mason would have the freedom to be the father he wanted to be without the constant weight of managing a 43-story building. His phone rang. Charlotte. Mason pulled over before answering. Hello? Mason, hi. Do you have a minute? Yeah, what's up? I wanted to tell you about the amendment before the closing, the permanent tenant protections. I didn't want you to think it was some kind of trick or last-minute negotiation tactic. David told me about it. It's good. Better than I expected, honestly. I meant what I said about protecting those people, about doing this right. Charlotte paused. I also wanted to thank you. For what? For not letting me get away with being the person I was that morning in the lobby, for calling me out, for... Her voice caught slightly. For showing me what actually matters. Mason didn't know what to say to that. I've been spending more time with my daughter, Charlotte continued. Real time. Not just scheduled custody hours where I'm half present. And it's hard, I'm bad at it. But I'm trying, and that's because of you. Charlotte, I didn't... You did, whether you meant to or not. She took a breath. Anyway, I just wanted you to know, the tenant protections are permanent. I got my board to approve it. Nobody can override them without a major legal fight. Your dad's building, your building, the people in it will be safe. I appreciate that. See you at the closing? Yeah, see you then. After she hung up, Mason sat in his truck watching Ellie draw more penguins in the back seat. Sometimes people surprised you. Sometimes they actually changed when you gave them a reason to. Charlotte Vale had been a certain kind of person 2 weeks ago. Arrogant, dismissive, so wrapped up in her own success that she couldn't see the damage she was causing. And now she was trying to be different. Maybe succeeding, maybe not. Time would tell. But at least she was trying. The closing was scheduled for a Thursday morning at 10 a.m. Mason wore his best clothes, khakis and a button-down shirt that he usually saved for parent-teacher conferences. Ellie was in school, which was probably for the best. The whole process would be boring for a 6-year-old. The law office handling the closing was downtown, all glass and marble and the kind of aggressive professionalism that made Mason's teeth hurt. He arrived 15 minutes early and found Charlotte already there, sitting in the waiting area with a leather portfolio and an expression that looked almost nervous. She stood when she saw him. Mason, hi. Charlotte. They shook hands awkwardly. The receptionist offered coffee. They both accepted, grateful for something to do with their hands. Big day, Charlotte said. Yeah. You ready for this? Not really. You? Terrified, actually. She smiled slightly. I keep thinking about all the ways I could screw this up. The building, the tenants, the promises I made. It's a lot of responsibility. It is. How did you handle it? The weight of it? Mason thought about the last 7 years. About late-night calls from the property manager about broken boilers. about budget meetings and maintenance schedules and tenant complaints, about carrying his father's legacy while trying to build his own life. Honestly, not great sometimes, but I just kept remembering what my dad said. Take care of the building by taking care of the people inside it. Everything else follows from that. Charlotte nodded slowly. That's good advice. They were called into the conference room before Mason could respond. The next 2 hours were a blur of paperwork, signatures, notarizations. Lawyers explained clauses neither Mason nor Charlotte were really listening to anymore. They'd both been through these documents a dozen times. The key moment came quietly, without fanfare. Just Mason signing the deed transfer, then Charlotte signing, then the notary stamping everything official. Harrow Tower had a new owner. Mason felt it like a physical loss, something being removed from his chest. 7 years. His father's prize. Now someone else's responsibility. But he'd done it right. Protected the people who mattered. Got fair value. Secured Ellie's future. That had to be enough. After the paperwork was complete and the lawyers were filing everything away, Charlotte asked if they could talk privately. They found an empty conference room down the hall. I have something for you, Charlotte said, pulling out an envelope. It's not part of the sale. It's personal. Mason opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, handwritten on nice paper. Mason, I'm writing this the night before the closing because I'm not good at saying important things out loud. I wanted you to know what this transaction has meant to me. Not the building, though obviously that's significant for my company, but what meeting you has meant. You showed me who I'd become. Someone so focused on winning that I'd stopped seeing people as people. Someone who measured worth in bank accounts and job titles instead of character and integrity. Someone who was failing her own daughter while judging other people's parenting. That person in the lobby 2 weeks ago? I'm ashamed of her. But I'm grateful you didn't let her stay hidden. You forced me to look at myself honestly, and that was the kindest cruelty anyone has ever given me. I promise you, and I don't make promises lightly anymore, that Harrow Tower will be managed the way your father would have wanted. The people inside it matter. Their businesses, their homes, their lives. I won't forget that. And if I start to forget, I have this letter to remind me who I don't want to be again. Thank you for trusting me with something so important to you. I'll try to deserve that trust. Charlotte Mason read it twice, then carefully folded it back into the envelope. You didn't have to write this, he said quietly. I did, actually. For me, more than you. Charlotte was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. I needed to put it in writing, make it real, hold myself accountable. You're going to do fine with the building, with Sophie, all of it. I hope so. She hesitated. Can I ask you something? And you can tell me to mind my own business if you want. Go ahead. What are you going to do now, after this? Mason hadn't really let himself think about that question. Keep working, I guess. I've still got my other properties. Still take construction jobs. Still have Ellie to raise. But no big building tying you down. No big building. Is that relief or regret I'm hearing? Both. Mason smiled slightly. Maybe more relief than I want to admit. They walked out of the law office together. The weather had cleared. Bright winter sun, cold but not brutal. The kind of Chicago day that made you remember why you put up with the bad ones. On the sidewalk, they paused. This is weird, Charlotte said. What is? Saying goodbye. I feel like we should stay in touch or something, but I don't know if that's appropriate given the business relationship. I don't think there are rules for this kind of thing. No, probably not. Charlotte extended her hand. Good luck, Mason. With everything. You too, Charlotte. They shook hands one final time, and then Charlotte walked toward her car and Mason walked toward his truck, and just like that, it was over. Harrow Tower wasn't his anymore. The relief hit him in waves on the drive home, followed immediately by grief, then relief again, then a strange kind of emptiness, like finishing a book you'd been reading for years. He picked Ellie up from school at the usual time. Did you sell the building? She asked immediately. Yeah, jelly bean, all done. How do you feel? Weird. Good weird or bad weird? Not sure yet. Ellie thought about this. Grandpa Thomas would be proud of you, though. Mason looked at his daughter in the rearview mirror. Yeah? How do you know? Because you took care of the people. That's what matters, right? Right. That's what mattered. And somehow, his 6-year-old daughter understood that better than he did. That night, Mason couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the radiator clank and hiss in the corner. The apartment was quiet except for those familiar sounds. The building settling, a car passing outside, the muffled television from the unit below. Normal sounds. Comforting, usually. Tonight they just amplified the noise in his head. He deposited the check from the sale that afternoon, watched the bank teller's eyes go wide when she saw the amount, then carefully neutral as she processed the transaction. The money was real now, sitting in his account. More money than he'd ever had at one time, more than his father had probably seen in his entire life. And Mason felt nothing about it. Not relief, not excitement, not satisfaction, just a hollow space where something important used to be. Around 2 a.m, he gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen, made coffee even though it was a terrible idea. Sat at the small table where he and Ellie ate breakfast every morning, where they did homework and played cards and had the small conversations that made up their life. His phone was on the table. He picked it up, scrolled through his contacts without really looking, put it back down. Who was he supposed to call at 2 a.m.? David would answer, but would also ask reasonable questions. Mason didn't want to answer. His sister in Milwaukee would panic, assume something was wrong with Ellie. The few friends he had from construction were either asleep or would tell him to stop overthinking and have a beer. None of that would help. The coffee tasted bitter. He drank it anyway. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Can't sleep either. "This is Charlotte. Hope it's okay I'm texting." Mason stared at the message. How did she even get his personal cell? Then he remembered. The closing documents had contact information. She probably pulled it from there. He should ignore it, keep boundaries clear. They weren't friends. They weren't anything except two people who'd completed a business transaction. Instead, he typed, "How'd you know I was awake?" Lucky guess. Big life changes tend to keep people up. You okay? Fine. Just thinking. About the sale? Among other things. There was a pause, then, for what it's worth, I'm second-guessing everything too. Wondering if I'm actually capable of keeping my promises, or if I'll revert to old patterns the second things get difficult. Mason found himself typing before he could stop himself. You'll probably revert a little. Most people do. The question is whether you catch yourself when it happens. That's oddly comforting. Didn't mean it to be, just honest. I know. That's why it's comforting. Mason took another sip of his terrible coffee. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled past, too early by at least an hour. Can I ask you something? Charlotte's text appeared. And you can tell me it's none of my business. Go ahead. Do you regret selling? Really? Mason sat with that question for a long time. His thumbs hovered over the keyboard, started several responses, deleted them all. Finally, I regret needing to sell. I regret that I couldn't figure out how to manage everything without sacrificing time with Ellie. I regret that my dad built something amazing and I'm the one who let it go. But the actual decision to sell? That was right. Doesn't mean it feels good. No, I guess it wouldn't. Another pause, then. I spent 3 hours with Sophie tonight. Helped with homework, made dinner together, watched some show about dragons she's obsessed with. It was exhausting and awkward, and I kept checking my phone even though I'd promised myself I wouldn't. Did she notice? Yeah. Called me out on it too. Asked if my work was more important than her dragon show. What'd you say? I put the phone in another room and gave her my full attention for the rest of the night. She seemed shocked. Made me realize how low I've set the bar. Mason smiled despite himself. Small steps. Tiny steps. But steps. Then, thank you for tonight, for not telling me to leave you alone. Misery loves company. We're not miserable. We're just adjusting. That a CEO thing? Reframing everything positively? It's a therapy thing. I've been going twice a week. Costs a fortune and makes me cry regularly. Highly recommend. I'll pass. Stubborn, practical. Same thing. A pause. I should let you try to sleep. Big day tomorrow, probably. Every day's a big day with a 6-year-old. Truth. Good night, Mason. Night, Charlotte. He put the phone down and finished his coffee. The hollow feeling was still there, but smaller somehow. Like maybe he wasn't the only person awake at 2 a.m. wondering if they'd made the right choices. 3 days later, Charlotte got her first real test. She was in her office reviewing quarterly projections when Richard Brennan appeared in her doorway without knocking. His expression suggested he'd found something he thought was ammunition. "We have a problem with Harrow Tower," he announced. Charlotte looked up slowly. "What kind of problem?" "The tenant on the third floor, the dry cleaning business. Their lease has a clause allowing early termination if the building changes ownership and they feel their business is threatened." "Okay. And they're exercising it, giving 60 days notice, which means we have 3,000 square feet of prime retail space about to open up." Richard sat down uninvited. "I've already got 3 inquiries from potential tenants willing to pay triple the current rent. Coffee shop chain, boutique fitness studio, and a wine bar. Any of them would be a significant upgrade." Charlotte set down her pen. "Did you ask Mr. Kobayashi why he's leaving?" "Who?" "The dry cleaner. His name is James Kobayashi. Did you ask him why he's terminating his lease?" Richard looked annoyed. "I don't need to ask. It's obvious. He's probably worried about rent increases, getting pushed out, the usual anxiety when buildings change hands. Honestly, it's doing us a favor. We get that space back without having to force the issue." "Call him." "What?" "Call Mr. Kobayashi. Schedule a meeting. I want to talk to him before we do anything else." "Charlotte, this is a waste of time. We have 3 ready tenants willing to—" "I said call him." Charlotte's voice had gone very quiet, which anyone who knew her understood was more dangerous than yelling. "Today. This morning, if possible." Richard stood up, his jaw tight. "You're making a mistake. This is exactly the kind of sentimentality that's going to cost us." "Then it costs us. Make the call." After he left, Charlotte sat alone in her office thinking about promises and how easy they were to break when money was involved. She could let Kobayashi go. Take the higher-paying tenant. Justify it as a business decision, not a violation of her commitment to Mason. But that's how it started, wasn't it? Small compromises, little justifications, until you woke up one day and realized you'd become exactly the person you'd promised not to be. She picked up her phone and texted Mason. "First test already. Dry cleaner on 3rd floor wants to leave. My CFO wants to replace him with someone paying triple. I'm meeting with the tenant before deciding anything. Thought you should know." The response came quickly. "Kobayashi? He's been there 30 years. Something's wrong if he wants out." "That's what I thought. Keep me posted." "Will do." The meeting with James Kobayashi was scheduled for the next morning. Charlotte arrived at Harrow Tower at 8 a.m., before most of the building was awake. She'd been inside during the acquisition process, of course, but always to the executive floors, never down to the retail level where actual businesses operated. The dry cleaning shop was small, impeccably clean, and smelled like steam and chemicals. An old-fashioned bell chimed when Charlotte walked in. Behind the counter, a man in his 70s looked up from a jacket he was examining for stains. "Ms. Vale?" His voice was accented, precise. "Mr. Kobayashi, thank you for meeting with me." "Of course. Though I'm not sure what there is to discuss. I've already filed the termination notice." "I know, but I wanted to understand why. After 30 years in this building, something must have changed." Kobayashi set down the jacket carefully. "May I be frank?" "Please." "I've been through 4 ownership changes in my time here. 3 of them resulted in me being asked to leave within a year. The 4th, Mr. Reed Sr., he was different. He kept his word, kept rent reasonable, fixed things when they broke, treated me like a person, not just a revenue stream. And you think I won't do the same?" "I think you're a corporation, Ms. Vale. And corporations have patterns. They make promises during acquisitions, then quietly phase out small tenants once the paperwork clears. I'm 73 years old. I don't have the energy to fight that fight again." Charlotte absorbed this. "What would it take for you to stay? Honestly? Nothing you can offer. This isn't about rent or lease terms. It's about trust. And I don't trust that you'll keep whatever promises you make today." The words stung because they were fair. Charlotte had given him no reason to trust her, no reason to believe she was different from every other corporate owner who'd pushed him around. "You're right," Charlotte said quietly. "I haven't earned your trust, but I want to try. What if we modified your lease with additional protections? Rent increases capped at 2% annually, guaranteed 10-year renewal option, first right of refusal if we ever sell again. All legally binding, filed with the county so the company can't override it even if I'm not in charge anymore." Kobayashi studied her. "Why would you do that?" "Because I made a promise to the previous owner, to protect tenants like you, and if I let you leave without fighting for you to stay, that promise means nothing. The previous owner was Mason Reed? Yes. Something shifted in Kobayashi's expression. I knew his father. Good man. Honest. His son is the same. He paused. Mason trusts you with this building? I don't know if trust is the right word, but he sold it to me, and I gave him my word I'd take care of the people inside it. Kobayashi was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands resting on the counter. Finally, let me see the lease modifications in writing. If they're what you say, I'll consider staying. I'll have them drafted today. And Ms. Vale? If you break your word, I'll make sure every small business owner in this city knows about it. I've been here a long time. I know people. Charlotte smiled. That's fair. I'd expect nothing less. She texted Mason from the lobby. Met with Kobayashi, offering him enhanced lease protections. Think he'll stay. What'd it cost you? Financially? About $60,000 a year in potential revenue from a higher-paying tenant? And the ability to look myself in the mirror, which turns out to be worth more than $60,000. Good. That's it? Just good? What else do you want me to say? You did the right thing. Keep doing it. Charlotte stared at that message for a while. There was no praise, no congratulation, no acknowledgement that she'd sacrificed profit for principle, just the expectation that she would continue doing what she'd promised to do. It was infuriating and oddly motivating at the same time. Back at Vale Industries headquarters, Richard was waiting in her office. Again. I heard you offered Kobayashi enhanced protections, he said without preamble. News travels fast. Charlotte, this is insane. We had premium tenants ready to go, and you're bending over backward for a dry cleaner who barely makes his current rent. He makes his rent fine, and he's been a stable tenant for 3 decades. That's worth something. It's worth exactly what market rent is worth, which is substantially less than what we could get. We're keeping him. Charlotte sat down at her desk. And if any other small tenants want to renegotiate for better protections, we're doing that too. I want a review of every lease in that building. Anyone who's been there more than 10 years gets offered enhanced stability terms. Richard's face went red. You're going to tank our returns on this property. I'm going to honor my commitments. There's a difference. The board won't support this. 4 of them already have, or did you forget how that vote went? That was before you started giving away our negotiating leverage. Richard leaned forward. I'm telling you, Charlotte, this is going to backfire. You're setting precedents that will haunt us across our entire portfolio. Good. Maybe we should set better precedents. This isn't how business works. Then maybe business should work differently. Richard stood up, his control clearly fraying. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. This needs to be addressed before you commit us to something we can't walk back from. Do what you need to do. I'll be ready. After he left, Charlotte allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of doubt. Was she being naive? Letting sentiment override sound business practice? Sacrificing shareholder value for some idealistic notion of corporate responsibility? Probably. But the alternative was becoming the person she'd been in that lobby 3 weeks ago. And she'd rather tank her career than go back to that. Her phone rang. Sophie's school. Ms. Vale? This is Principal Martinez. I'm calling about Sophie. Charlotte's heart stopped. Is she hurt? No, nothing like that, but she's in my office. There was an incident with another student. Can you come in to discuss it? I'm in the middle of... Charlotte stopped herself. Heard Mason's voice in her head. Ellie comes first. Everything else fits around that. Yes, I can be there in 30 minutes. Thank you. We'll see you soon. Charlotte grabbed her coat and bag, told her assistant to clear her afternoon, ignored the voice in her head saying she had too much to do, too many fires to put out, too many important things that couldn't wait. Sophie was more important. The drive to Sophie's private school in Lincoln Park took 40 minutes in traffic. Charlotte spent the whole time preparing for the worst. Sophie had gotten into a fight, been bullied, done the bullying. The scenario spiraled in her mind, each worse than the last. Principal Martinez's office was warm, decorated with children's artwork and achievement certificates. Sophie sat in one of the chairs looking small and miserable. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. Mom! Sophie's voice cracked. Charlotte wanted to rush over, pull her daughter into a hug, promise everything would be okay. Instead, she forced herself to sit calmly in the other chair and turned to Principal Martinez. What happened? Sophie had a disagreement with another student during recess. It escalated. Sophie pushed the other girl, and the girl fell and scraped her knee. Martinez's tone was neutral, professional. We have a zero-tolerance policy for physical contact, as you know. I didn't mean to push her hard, Sophie said quietly. She was saying mean things about you, and I got mad and... About me? Charlotte looked between her daughter and the principal. Martinez sighed. The other student, I won't use names, apparently overheard her parents discussing your company's business practices. Real estate acquisitions, tenant displacement, that sort of thing. She repeated some of what she'd heard. Sophie took exception. Charlotte felt something cold settle in her stomach. What did the girl say? Mom, it doesn't matter. Sophie, what did she say? Sophie's lip trembled. She said her dad said your company destroys people's lives and you don't care because you're too rich to notice, and that people like you are what's wrong with Chicago. And I told her that wasn't true, that you were trying to be better, and she laughed and said her dad said people like you never change. And then She stopped, fresh tears starting. I pushed her. I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have, but I was so mad. Charlotte sat very still, processing this. Some parent at this expensive private school had been talking about her company's practices in front of their daughter, who then used it to attack Sophie on the playground. The old Charlotte would have been furious, would have called lawyers, threatened the school, demanded to know which family had badmouthed her so she could make their life difficult. The new Charlotte, the one trying very hard to be better, recognized that maybe the other parent had a point. Sophie, she said carefully, you know pushing is wrong even when you're defending someone. I know. And what that girl said, even if it was mean, doesn't justify physical contact. I know. Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. But Charlotte took a breath. I appreciate that you were trying to defend me. That matters. And I'm sorry that you're being put in a position where you have to defend me at all. Sophie looked up, confused. What? The girl's father isn't entirely wrong about what our company has done in the past, about how we've operated. Charlotte glanced at Principal Martinez, who was watching with interest. I'm trying to change that, to do better. But I can't change the past, and I can't control what people say about it. So she was right? Sophie's voice broke. About you being a bad person? I've made bad choices. Done things I regret. Hurt people without meaning to. Charlotte reached over and took her daughter's hand. But I'm working on being better, and I need you to know that pushing people who say mean things isn't the answer, even when they're talking about someone you love. Then what am I supposed to do? Tell them they're wrong. Explain why. Walk away if they won't listen. Come talk to me about it after school so I can help you process it. Charlotte squeezed her hand. But never physical contact. Promise me. I promise. Sophie wiped her eyes. Am I in big trouble? Principal Martinez spoke up. Sophie will need to apologize to the other student and help nurse restock the first aid supplies for the next week. That's her consequence for the pushing. She looked at Charlotte. I think we can consider the matter closed if that's acceptable to you. That's more than fair, thank you. Outside the school, walking to the car, Sophie was quiet. Charlotte let the silence sit for a while before speaking. You want to get ice cream? Sophie looked at her suspiciously. I just got in trouble at school. I know, but you were also defending your mom, which deserves acknowledgement even if the method was wrong. Plus, I could use some ice cream. It's been a rough day. Because of me? Not because of you, because of work stuff, adult stuff. Charlotte unlocked the car. But spending time with you would make it better. They went to a small place in Lakeview that Sophie loved, got enormous sundaes that neither of them would finish, sat in a booth by the window watching people walk past in the February cold. Mom? Sophie was pushing whipped cream around with her spoon. Yeah, baby? Are you really trying to be different, or did you just say that because Principal Martinez was there? The question hit harder than it should have. I'm really trying. It's not easy. I mess up a lot, but I'm trying. Because of that man, the one who owned the building? Charlotte paused. How do you know about him? I heard you on the phone with Grandma. You said some guy in a work jacket made you see yourself differently. Nothing got past this kid. Yeah, because of him, and because of you. Because I realized I was becoming someone I didn't want to be, and if I didn't change, I was going to lose everything that actually mattered. Sophie absorbed this. Did you lose stuff already? Like how you and Dad got divorced? Yeah, like that. Do you think you can get it back? The stuff you lost? Charlotte thought about her ex-husband, about the marriage that had disintegrated under the weight of her ambition and his resentment, about the years of Sophie's childhood she'd missed while chasing deals and promotions. Some of it, no. It's gone and I have to live with that. She set down her spoon. But some of it, like my relationship with you, I can work on, if you let me. I want you to work on it, Sophie said quietly. I miss having a mom who's actually here. I miss being here. I'm sorry it took me so long to figure out how important that is. They finished their ice cream in more comfortable silence. On the drive to drop Sophie back at her dad's house, Charlotte's phone rang. Richard, probably calling about the emergency board meeting he'd threatened. Charlotte declined the call and turned off her phone. Who was that? Sophie asked. Work. It can wait. Sophie smiled, a real, genuine smile that made Charlotte's chest hurt. Really? Really? Right now, I'm just your mom. Work can figure itself out for a few hours. She walked Sophie to the door. Her ex-husband Marcus answered, looking tired and wary. He and Charlotte had barely spoken in months beyond logistics about custody schedules. Hey, he said. School called me too. Sophie okay? She's fine. We talked about it. She understands what she did wrong. Good. Marcus paused. You want to come in? Maybe talk about... Not tonight. But maybe this weekend? We should probably coordinate better on how we're handling things with her. He looked surprised, but nodded. Yeah, that'd be good. After Sophie went inside, Marcus lingered at the door. Charlotte, whatever you're doing, therapy or medication, or just finally slowing down, keep doing it. Sophie's been happier lately, more settled. I'm trying. I can tell. It matters. Driving home, Charlotte thought about how change was supposed to look. Some dramatic transformation, probably. A clear before and after. The old life abandoned completely for some new, enlightened existence. But real change was messier than that. It was ice cream after school when you should have been at work. It was choosing the dry cleaner over higher-paying tenants, even when your CFO called you naive. It was turning off your phone during the drive to your daughter's school and actually meaning it. Small choices, made over and over. Until eventually, they added up to something different. Her phone was still off when she got home. She left it that way and went to bed early, sleeping better than she had in weeks. The emergency board meeting Richard called happened 2 days later. Charlotte walked in prepared for a fight. She got one. This obsession with tenant protection is unsustainable, Richard started before everyone had even sat down. Charlotte's decisions regarding Harrow Tower are going to set precedents across our entire portfolio. Small tenants will demand the same terms. Our negotiating position will be compromised. We'll see profit margins shrink across the board. Or, Elena countered, we'll build a reputation as a responsible landlord and attract better long-term tenants who actually stay because they trust us. That's idealistic nonsense. It's strategic differentiation in a market where corporate landlords are increasingly seen as predatory. The argument escalated from there. Richard presented projections showing reduced returns. Elena presented counterpoints about reputational value and regulatory risk. Park asked detailed questions about implementation. Thompson suggested pilot programs and quarterly reviews. Charlotte let them argue for 20 minutes before speaking. Here's what I know, she said, her voice cutting through the debate. 3 weeks ago, I stood in a lobby and judged a man based on his clothes and his work boots. I questioned whether he should be a parent because he didn't look successful enough. And I did it in front of his 6-year-old daughter. The room went quiet. That man owned the building I was standing in. Turned out he was also a better person than I'd been in years. And when I try to imagine explaining to him why I'm breaking the promises I made, why I'm pushing out the tenants I swore to protect, I can't do it. Not because I'm afraid of his judgment, but because I'm afraid of mine. This isn't about judgment, Richard said. It's about fiduciary responsibility. It's about both. And I'm telling you, we can fulfill our fiduciary responsibility without being ruthless. We can make money without destroying people's livelihoods, but it requires us to accept smaller returns in exchange for operating ethically. And if the shareholders reject that approach, then they can replace me. But as long as I'm CEO, this is how we're operating. Harrow Tower is the test case. We do it right there, prove it's sustainable, and then we expand those practices across our portfolio. Park spoke up. What about a compromise? We maintain the enhanced protections at Harrow Tower for 2 years. Track the financial impact carefully. If the returns are still acceptable, we consider broader implementation. If they're not, we revisit. Charlotte considered this. It wasn't everything she wanted, but it gave her time to prove the model worked. I can accept that. With the understanding that acceptable returns doesn't mean matching our most aggressive projections. It means staying profitable while treating people fairly. Define fairly, Richard said. Stable housing for residential tenants. Reasonable rent for small businesses. Maintenance that actually gets done. Basic dignity in how we interact with the people who pay us. Charlotte looked around the table. That's not radical, it's baseline decent. The vote was closer this time, 5-4 in Charlotte's favor. Richard looked murderous but kept his mouth shut. After the meeting, Elena caught Charlotte in the hallway. "You're gambling your career on this," she said quietly. "I know. Richard's going to use any stumble as ammunition to push you out. I know that too. So why risk it?" Charlotte thought about Sophie's question. "Are you really trying to be different?" "Because the alternative is going back to being someone I can't stand, and that's not an option anymore." Elena smiled. "Good. Because for what it's worth, I think you're right. About all of it. Even if it costs us money? Especially if it costs us money. Making profit while burning everything down isn't success. It's just arson with a quarterly report." That night, Charlotte texted Mason. "Survived another board meeting. Tenant protection still in place. My CFO still hates me. Pretty sure I'm one bad quarter away from getting fired." His response came quickly. "You'll be fine. How do you know?" "Because you actually care now. That's harder to fake than success." Charlotte smiled at her phone. Then, because she was feeling brave or stupid or some combination of both. "Can I ask you something? And feel free to say no." "Shoot. Would you be willing to consult on the Harrow Tower management?" "Nothing formal. Just someone I can run decisions past who actually understands what those tenants need." There was a long pause. Charlotte started to regret asking. Then, what would that look like? "Honestly, I don't know. Maybe monthly calls? Quarterly reviews of tenant concerns? I'd pay you, obviously." "Don't want your money." "Then what do you want?" Another pause. "For you to keep your promises." "That's it. You do that. I'll help however I can." "Deal." "Fair warning, though. I'm not going to be gentle if you start slipping. I wouldn't want you to be." Charlotte put the phone down and sat in her quiet apartment thinking about accountability and how you couldn't force someone to be better, but you could give them reasons to try. Mason had given her a reason. Sophie had given her a reason. Now she just had to prove she could actually follow through. 6 months after the sale, Mason got a call from Charlotte at 7 a.m. on a Saturday. "I need your help," she said without preamble, "and I need it now." Mason was already awake, making pancakes while Ellie sat at the kitchen table reading a book about whales. He wedged the phone between his shoulder and ear and flipped a pancake. "What's wrong?" "The boiler at Harrow Tower died. Completely. We've got 300 residential units with no heat, and it's 15 degrees outside. My property manager is saying it'll take 3 days to get parts and another 2 to install. That's unacceptable, but I don't know enough about building systems to know if he's lying or incompetent or actually right. He's probably right about the timeline. Those commercial boilers are specialized, but 3 days is too long in this weather." Mason turned off the stove. "You need temporary heat sources. Industrial heaters on every floor, prioritize units with elderly residents and families with small kids, and you need to put people up in hotels if their units drop below 60 degrees. That's going to cost a fortune." "Yeah, it is. You want to do this right or cheap?" Charlotte was quiet for a moment. "Right. Obviously right. Can you help me coordinate it? I'll pay whatever your rate is." "I told you I don't want your money. Mason, it's Saturday morning and I'm asking you to spend your day fixing my problem. I'm paying you." "Fine, but Ellie comes with me. I'm not missing her weekend because your boiler broke." "Deal. I'll meet you there in an hour." Mason hung up and looked at his daughter. "Change of plans, Jellybean. We're going to the tower." Ellie's eyes lit up. "The big building? Can I bring my whale book?" "Bring whatever you want. We might be there a while." By the time they arrived, Charlotte was already in the basement with her property manager, a stressed-looking man named Dennis who clearly hadn't expected his boss to show up on a weekend. The boiler room was a nightmare of exposed pipes and ancient machinery, and the temperature down there was barely warmer than outside. "Walk me through it," Charlotte was saying to Dennis, her breath fogging in the cold air. She was wearing jeans and a North Face jacket, no makeup, hair in a ponytail. Not the CEO version of herself, just a person trying to solve a problem. Dennis explained the failure. A cracked heat exchanger. Unfixable. Needed complete replacement. He'd already called 3 suppliers. Parts would arrive Tuesday at the earliest. Mason listened, then asked a few technical questions that made Dennis look relieved to be talking to someone who understood the systems. They went back and forth on temporary solutions, rental equipment, prioritization strategies. Charlotte took notes on her phone, asking clarifying questions, not pretending to know more than she did. Okay, she said finally. Dennis, get the rental heaters ordered. I want them here by noon. Mason, help him figure out placement. I'm going to start calling hotels and setting up emergency accommodations. We should prioritize, Dennis started. Elderly and families first. Mason already told me. Anyone else who wants a hotel room gets one too, but we make sure the vulnerable populations are covered immediately. Charlotte was already scrolling through her phone. What else? Food, Mason said. People can't cook if their units are too cold, and some of them probably don't have money for restaurants all weekend. Right, okay. I'll arrange catering. 3 meals a day until heat's restored. Charlotte looked at Dennis. What am I forgetting? Communication, Mason said. You need to tell people what's happening, what you're doing about it, and when they can expect resolution. Don't let them panic. Charlotte nodded. I'll draft something and have it delivered to every unit within the hour. She was good in a crisis, Mason noticed. No drama, no blaming, just systematic problem solving. The CEO armor she usually wore had been replaced by something more functional, more real. Ellie tugged on Mason's sleeve. Daddy, I'm cold. I know, Jellybean. We'll warm up soon. He looked at Charlotte. You have somewhere she can sit that's not freezing? The lobby's heated. That system runs separate. There's a couch near the security desk. Sarah can keep an eye on her if that's okay. Mason nodded. Go on up, Ellie. Stay where Sarah can see you. After Ellie left, Mason and Dennis spent the next 3 hours coordinating the emergency response. Rental heaters arrived in trucks. Union guys Charlotte somehow got to work on a Saturday started installing them on every floor. Mason supervised placement, making sure the equipment was safe and effective. Charlotte was everywhere, checking on residents, coordinating hotel shuttles, arguing with suppliers about rush delivery fees she paid without hesitation. At one point, Mason saw her helping an elderly woman carry her overnight bag to a waiting car, talking to her gently about how the hotel had a nice restaurant and the company was covering all expenses. By early afternoon, the crisis was under control. Everyone who needed alternative housing had it. The building had temporary heat, food was being delivered, and Charlotte had personally visited or called every single residential tenant to apologize and explain the situation. Mason found her in the 3rd floor hallway, sitting on the floor with her back against the wall, looking exhausted. You okay? He asked. I've been better. You? I'm fine. Mason slid down to sit beside her. You handled that well. I had help. You made good decisions fast. That counts. Charlotte laughed tiredly. I spent about $40,000 in 4 hours. Richard's going to have a stroke when he sees the expenses. You kept people safe and showed them you actually care. That's worth more than $40,000. Mason Reed, business consultant. Who knew? I'm just saying you did the right thing. Some people would have cut corners. The old me would have cut corners. Charlotte tilted her head back against the wall. The old me would have blamed Dennis, minimized the problem, done the bare minimum legally required, and nothing more. But you didn't. No, I didn't, because I kept hearing your voice in my head asking what I was willing to sacrifice for profit. She looked at him. It's annoying, by the way. Having a conscience. I was much more efficient when I didn't care. Mason smiled. Yeah, caring's inconvenient like that. They sat in silence for a moment, the old building settling around them. Somewhere above, Mason could hear the hum of the rental heaters. Below, the sound of workers still coordinating the boiler replacement. Sophie's visiting this weekend, Charlotte said abruptly. Well, she was supposed to. I had to cancel because of this. She upset? Surprisingly, no. I called and explained what happened, and she asked if people were okay, if they had somewhere warm to sleep. When I said yes, she said she was proud of me for taking care of them. Charlotte's voice got thick. 8 years old, and she's proud of me for doing basic human decency. That's good, though. Means she sees you trying. I guess. Charlotte pulled out her phone and showed Mason a text from Sophie. It's okay, Mom. Those people need you more than I do today. Love you. She's a good kid, Mason said. She is. Better than I deserve. Stop that. Stop what? The self-flagellation thing. You made mistakes. You're fixing them. That's how it works. Mason stood up and offered her a hand. Come on. Let's check on Ellie. She's probably convinced Sarah to let her reorganize the security desk by now. They found Ellie exactly where Mason had left her, except now she'd made friends with two other kids whose families were waiting for hotel transportation. All three were sprawled on the lobby floor playing some complicated game involving whale facts and imagination. Daddy, this is Marcus, and this is Lily, and we're playing Ocean Explorers, and I'm the whale scientist. Ellie barely paused for breath. Did you know blue whales can hold their breath for up to 90 minutes? I didn't know that. Well, now you do. She went back to her game, completely absorbed. Charlotte watched them with an expression Mason couldn't quite read. She's really happy. Yeah, it doesn't take much. Some other kids and a clean floor. Sophie used to be like that. Before the divorce, before everything got complicated. She'd play for hours with nothing but her imagination. Charlotte's voice went quiet. I miss that version of her. The one who wasn't worried about whether Mom was going to show up or disappoint her again. So stop disappointing her. I'm trying. It's harder than it sounds. Everything worthwhile is hard. That's what makes it worthwhile. Charlotte's phone rang. She glanced at it and grimaced. Richard probably saw the expense reports. You going to answer? Not until I have to. She declined the call. I'll deal with him Monday. Today is about making sure these people are okay. Marcus and Lily's parents arrived to collect them. Ellie waved goodbye and came over to Mason and Charlotte. Are we done? She asked. Almost. You hungry? Starving. What do you say we grab some lunch? My treat, Charlotte offered. As a thank you for letting me steal your dad all morning. Ellie looked at Mason for permission. He nodded. Sure. Where do you want to go, Jellybean? Can we go to that place with the good grilled cheese? They ended up at a diner in Bridgeport, the kind of place with checkered floors and waitresses who called everyone honey. Ellie ordered her grilled cheese with tomato soup. Mason got a burger. Charlotte ordered a salad she picked at without much interest. So, Charlotte said after the food arrived, I've been meaning to ask you something. Yeah? How do you do it? Balance everything? You make it look easy, but I know it's not. Mason took a bite of his burger, thinking, I don't balance anything. I just prioritize. Ellie comes first. Everything else arranges itself around that one fact. But your work, your other properties, fit into the spaces where Ellie's at school or asleep or doesn't need me. And if they don't fit, they don't happen. He shrugged. It's not complicated. It's just hard sometimes. What about what you need? Your own life? This is my life. Ellie, my work, the people I'm responsible for. That's enough. Don't you get lonely? The question surprised him. Mason looked at Ellie, who was completely absorbed in her grilled cheese. Sometimes, yeah, but lonely's better than distracted. I tried dating a couple years ago. Couldn't do it. Couldn't give someone the attention they deserved while also being the dad Ellie needed. So you just stopped? For now. Maybe when she's older, when she needs me less, I'll figure that part out. But right now, Mason shook his head. This is what matters. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment. I admire that. The clarity. I've spent my whole adult life trying to have everything at once and ending up with nothing that actually mattered. You're fixing that. Am I? Or am I just making different mistakes? Probably both. But at least the new mistakes don't hurt your kid. Charlotte smiled sadly. Low bar. Sometimes low bars are the right place to start. They finished lunch talking about smaller things. Ellie told Charlotte extensive whale facts. Charlotte told Ellie about Sophie and her dragon obsession. Mason watched the two of them interact and thought about how strange life was. How the woman who judged him so harshly 6 months ago was now sitting in a diner listening patiently to his daughter explain the difference between baleen whales and toothed whales. People could change. Not easily, not completely, but enough to matter. When they left the diner, Charlotte's phone was full of missed calls and angry voicemails from Richard. She listened to one, winced, and put the phone away. That bad? Mason asked. He's calling emergency board meetings and threatening my position. Apparently spending $40,000 without consulting him first is grounds for removal. Charlotte didn't sound particularly worried. Whatever. I'll deal with it Monday. You want me to? No, this is my fight. I need to handle it. She looked at him seriously. But thank you for today, for the last 6 months, really. You could have walked away after the sale closed. Instead, you've been holding you accountable? I was going to say supportive, but yeah, that too. Mason didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and took Ellie's hand. We should get going. It's almost her bedtime. Of course. Thank you again. Charlotte crouched down to Ellie's level. It was really nice spending time with you today. Maybe sometime you and Sophie could meet. She'd love your whale facts. Ellie's eyes went wide. Really? I could teach her about humpback songs. I'm sure she'd love that. They said goodbye and headed to Mason's truck. As he buckled Ellie into her seat, she said, I like her, Daddy. Yeah, how come? She listens, and she's trying to be better. That's important, right? Yeah, Jelly Bean. That's very important. The emergency board meeting happened Monday afternoon. Charlotte walked in prepared for a fight and possibly her termination. Richard started immediately. $42,000 in emergency expenses without board approval, unauthorized hotel stays, catering, rental equipment. Charlotte, this is exactly the kind of unilateral decision-making that kept 300 people from freezing in their homes? Charlotte interrupted. That showed our tenants we actually care about their well-being? That prevented a PR nightmare and probably half a dozen lawsuits? You could have consulted. There was no time to consult. The boiler died at 6 a.m. on a Saturday. People needed heat immediately. I made the call. Without considering the financial impact, all right? But so did. I considered it, decided keeping people safe was worth the cost. If that's a fireable offense, then go ahead and fire me. The room went silent. Elena spoke up. Richard, what would you have done? Let people freeze while we debated the expense? I would have found a more cost-effective solution. Such as? We could have limited hotel stays to only the most vulnerable. We didn't need to offer them to everyone. And the catering was unnecessary. People could have managed their own meals. In units with no heat, where were they supposed to store food, Richard? Prepare it? Thompson jumped in. I actually think Charlotte's response was appropriate given the circumstances. Quick, comprehensive, and it prevented significant reputational damage. If this had hit the news that we left tenants in the cold, we would have handled it, Richard snapped. How? Charlotte leaned forward. Tell me specifically how you would have handled it better. Richard opened his mouth, then closed it. He had no answer because there wasn't one. Charlotte had done exactly what needed to be done, and they both knew it. Park cleared her throat. I've reviewed the expenses. Everything was reasonable given the emergency. Charlotte made a judgment call. It was the right call. Can we move on? No, we cannot move on. Richard's face was red now. This is part of a pattern. Charlotte has consistently prioritized sentiment over strategy. The tenant protections, the Kobayashi lease, now this. She's running this company like a charity instead of a business. We're still profitable, Elena pointed out. Not as profitable as we could be. There's more to business than maximum profit, Charlotte said quietly. There's sustainability. There's reputation. There's the ability to sleep at night knowing you didn't destroy people's lives for an extra few points on a quarterly report. That's naive. It's realistic. The political climate is shifting. Regulations are coming. Cities are cracking down on predatory landlords. And when that happens, companies like ours that actually treat people decently will have a competitive advantage. Charlotte pulled out her tablet and projected data onto the screen. This is tenant retention at Harrow Tower. 6 months post-acquisition, we have 97% retention. Industry average for similar transitions is 73%. You know what that means? Lower turnover costs, fewer vacancies, more stable revenue. Thompson was nodding. That's actually impressive. It's the result of treating people like humans instead of revenue streams. Turns out when you don't screw people over, they stick around. And our returns? Richard demanded. 12.3% annually. Below our aggressive projections, yes. But still solid, still sustainable, and accomplished without displacing a single tenant. Charlotte clicked to another slide. Meanwhile, our competitors are dealing with tenant unions, bad press, and city council members looking to make examples of corporate landlords. We're positioned as the responsible alternative. That has value, Richard. Maybe not value you can quantify on a spreadsheet, but value nonetheless. The board was quiet, considering. Mendoza, who rarely spoke, raised his hand. I have a question. Charlotte, do Do you believe this model, treating tenants well, prioritizing retention, can scale across our entire portfolio? Yes. With modifications for different markets and property types, yes. It won't work everywhere the same way, but the principle works. Treat people fairly, they'll stay longer and cause fewer problems. Basic human psychology. And you're willing to stake your position on that belief? Charlotte took a breath. I am. If the board wants a different approach, if you want someone who'll squeeze every dollar regardless of cost, I'm not your CEO. But if you want someone who can build a sustainable, profitable business that doesn't require us to be predatory, then I'm asking you to trust me a little longer. The vote was 7-2 in Charlotte's favor. Richard and Lou were the only dissents. After the meeting, Richard cornered Charlotte in the hallway. This isn't over, he said quietly. One bad quarter, one significant stumble, and I'll have the votes to remove you. I know. So why risk it? Why not just play it safe? Do things the way they've always been done. Charlotte thought about Mason in the diner, about the clarity of his priorities, about Sophie texting that she was proud of her mom for taking care of people, about Ellie's whale facts and the simple joy of a 6-year-old who felt safe in her world. Because safe isn't the same as right, she said, and I'm tired of choosing wrong just because it's easier. 3 months later, Charlotte got a call from Mason she wasn't expecting. I need advice, he said without preamble. Okay, what's up? Ellie's teacher says she should skip a grade. She's ahead in everything, getting bored in her current class. They want to move her up next year. That's great, isn't it? I don't know, maybe. But she's already the youngest in her class. Move her up another year and she'll be even more out of sync socially. And what if it's too much pressure? What if she starts associating school with stress instead of fun? Charlotte smiled. You're overthinking this. I'm her father. Overthinking is my job. Fair. What does Ellie want? She says it sounds cool, but she's 7. She doesn't understand the implications. So you make the best decision you can with the information you have. Talk to her teacher more. Maybe get her tested. See what a child psychologist recommends. But ultimately, you know your kid better than anyone else. What if I make the wrong call? Then you adjust. That's what parenting is, right? Making imperfect decisions and course correcting when necessary. Mason was quiet for a moment. When did you get so wise? I have a good consultant who keeps me honest. Yeah, well, your consultant is currently panicking about elementary school placement. Your consultant will figure it out. He always does. After they hung up, Charlotte thought about how much had changed in 9 months. Mason calling her for advice. Her actually having advice worth giving. The comfortable familiarity of their occasional conversations. The way they'd somehow become something like friends despite the rocky beginning. Her phone buzzed. Sophie, texting a photo of herself holding a first-place ribbon from her volleyball tournament. We won! Wish you could have been there. Charlotte's heart sank. She'd missed it. Had a meeting she couldn't reschedule, told Sophie she'd make the next one. She texted back, so proud of you. I'm sorry I missed it. Dinner tonight to celebrate? Your choice of restaurant. Can we go to that Italian place with the big portions? Absolutely. Pick you up at 6. Charlotte cleared her calendar for the rest of the day. Told her assistant no calls, no emergencies, nothing until tomorrow. Then she spent the afternoon shopping for a gift, not because Sophie needed another thing, but because Charlotte needed to mark the moment, to show up even though she'd failed to show up when it mattered. At dinner, Sophie talked nonstop about the tournament, about the winning point, about her team. Charlotte listened without checking her phone once. Mom, Sophie said over dessert. Yeah, baby? You're different now. Better different. I'm trying to be. No, you are. You're here. Like, actually here. Not just physically here, but thinking about being here. Charlotte felt her eyes sting. That's the nicest thing you've said to me in years. Well, it's true. Sophie took a bite of her tiramisu. Dad noticed too. He said you seemed less angry all the time. I was angry? Yeah, not at me or him specifically, just at everything, like the whole world was annoying you. Sophie shrugged. You're not like that anymore. Charlotte thought about the woman she'd been 9 months ago. Stressed, ambitious, so focused on winning that she'd stopped noticing what she was losing in the process. That woman had been angry. Sophie was right. Angry at anyone who slowed her down, anyone who didn't meet her standards, anyone who reminded her that success wasn't the same as happiness. I think I was angry because I was unhappy, Charlotte said carefully. And instead of fixing what was making me unhappy, I just worked harder and got angrier. What changed? I met someone who showed me what actually mattered, and I realized I was destroying everything important while chasing things that didn't matter at all. The guy with the building? Charlotte smiled. Yeah, the guy with the building. Is he like your friend now? Sort of. More like someone who keeps me honest. Reminds me who I want to be when I start forgetting. Sophie thought about this. Everyone needs someone like that. Yeah, baby, they do. A year after the sale, Mason got an invitation to a ribbon-cutting ceremony at Harrow Tower. Charlotte was unveiling a new tenant resource center, a dedicated space with legal aid, job placement services, and community programming. Mason almost didn't go. It felt weird being invited back to a building he used to own. But Ellie wanted to see it, and Charlotte had specifically asked him to come, so he put on his decent shirt and drove downtown on a Saturday morning. The tower looked the same from outside. Inside, though, things had changed. The lobby was warmer somehow, less intimidating. There were plants now, comfortable seating, a community bulletin board advertising tenant events. Charlotte was in the new resource center when Mason arrived, directing last-minute setup. She wore slacks and a blazer but looked relaxed, comfortable. When she saw Mason and Ellie, her face lit up. You came, and you brought the whale expert, Ellie giggled. I know more about dolphins now, too. We'll need a full briefing later. Charlotte crouched down. Hey, there's someone I want you to meet. Sophie, come here. A girl who looked like a younger version of Charlotte appeared from behind a display table. She was taller than Ellie, dark-haired, with braces and an uncertain smile. Sophie, this is Ellie. Ellie, this is my daughter Sophie. Hi, Sophie said shyly. Hi, do you like animals? I know a lot about animals, especially marine animals, but also Arctic animals, and some savanna animals, but not as many. Sophie's smile grew more genuine. I like dragons. Does that count? Dragons are cool. They're not real, but they're still cool. Do you want to see my book about mythical creatures? I brought it just in case. The two girls wandered off to a corner, already deep in conversation about fantasy animals versus real ones. Mason watched them go, then turned to Charlotte. Smooth operation. I had help. Turns out when you actually ask tenants what they need instead of assuming, you get better results. Charlotte gestured around the room. This was their idea. The legal aid, the job services, all of it. I just funded it. It's good. Your dad would approve. Thomas didn't build this. He built the foundation. You're just using it right. Before Charlotte could respond, the ceremony started. There were speeches. Charlotte's was short and focused on the tenants rather than herself. A few tenants spoke too, including James Kobayashi, who talked about trust and second chances and corporate responsibility. When it was over and people were mingling, Richard Brennan appeared at Charlotte's elbow. Interesting event, he said neutrally. Thank you for coming. I'm still not convinced this is sustainable long term. I know. That's okay. I'm convinced enough for both of us. Richard looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. The quarterly numbers look good, I'll give you that. High praise from you. Don't get used to it. But there was something almost like respect in his voice. You're making this work somehow. Against my better judgment, but you're making it work. After he walked away, Elena appeared. Was that almost a compliment from Richard? I think it was. Mark the calendar. Historic moment. Charlotte laughed. How are things with the other properties? Any pushback on implementing the Harrow Tower model? Some, but mostly people are coming around. Tenant retention is up across the board. Maintenance requests are being handled faster. We're actually building goodwill, which is apparently valuable. Imagine that. Mason found them a while later. Ellie wants to show Sophie the good pizza place near our apartment. You okay with that? Charlotte checked with Sophie, who nodded enthusiastically. Yeah, let's go. The four of them ended up at the same place Mason and Ellie had taken Charlotte 9 months earlier. Different booth, same checkered floors, same waitress who called everyone honey. The girls sat together, immediately bonding over shared interests and the easy friendship of kids who hadn't learned to be guarded yet. Mason and Charlotte sat across from them, watching. They're good together, Charlotte said quietly. Yeah, Ellie needs more friends. She's skipping a grade next year. We finally decided to do it, and I worry about her social connections. How's she handling it? Excited mostly, nervous sometimes. But she's tough. She'll figure it out. Like her dad. Mason snorted. I'm not tough. I'm just stubborn. Same thing, different packaging. They ate their pizza and talked about small things. Sophie's volleyball season, Ellie's upcoming science fair project, the never-ending challenge of Chicago winters. Normal conversation between people who'd somehow become part of each other's lives. When the check came, Charlotte grabbed it before Mason could. My treat, consider it a consultant fee. I thought I told you I don't want your money. Too bad. You're getting pizza instead. After lunch, they walked back to where both cars were parked. The spring weather was finally breaking through winter's grip. Warmer air, longer days, the sense that everything might actually survive the cold after all. Mason, Charlotte said as they reached his truck, can I tell you something? Sure. A year ago, I was standing in that lobby thinking I had everything figured out, thinking success meant money and power and controlling every room I entered. And then I ran into you, literally, and everything fell apart. I'm not sure where this is going. I'm saying thank you for calling me out, for not letting me hide behind excuses, for showing me what actually matters. Charlotte's voice was steady but emotional. I was drowning and didn't even know it. You threw me a lifeline whether you meant to or not. Mason didn't know what to say to that. You did the hard part. All I did was hold up a mirror. Sometimes that's exactly what people need, someone willing to show them the truth even when it's ugly. They stood there as the parking lot, two people who'd started as adversaries and somehow ended up as something else. Not quite friends, not quite family, but connected in ways that mattered. So what now? Mason asked. You've got your tenant center, your improved retention numbers, your board mostly on your side. What's next? Charlotte smiled. Keep showing up, keep trying. Keep choosing the hard right thing over the easy wrong thing. She glanced at Sophie, who was showing Ellie something on her phone. And maybe actually succeed at being the mom my daughter deserves instead of just trying and failing. You're not failing. I'm not succeeding either, but I'm better than I was. That's something. That's everything, Mason corrected. Progress is progress. Direction matters more than distance. When did you become a philosopher? When I became a single parent. You learn things when you're responsible for someone else's entire world. Charlotte nodded slowly. Yeah, I'm starting to understand that. Ellie ran over, breathless and excited. Daddy, Sophie invited me to her birthday party next month. Can I go, please? Mason looked at Charlotte, who shrugged. It's a sleepover. Totally understand if that's too much. She can go, Mason said. If she wants to. Really? Ellie's eyes went wide. Really, really? Really, really? But you have to promise to be on your best behavior. I promise. I super promise. Ellie threw her arms around Mason's waist. Thank you, thank you, thank you. After they said goodbye and drove away, Ellie talked nonstop about the party, about Sophie, about how this was the best day ever. Mason listened with half his attention, while the other half thought about how strange life was, how the worst moments sometimes led to the best ones if you stayed open to the possibility of change. Charlotte had changed. He'd watched it happen slowly over the course of a year. Not perfectly, not completely, but genuinely. She'd taken the worst parts of herself and done the painful work of becoming someone different, someone better. And in the process, she'd somehow become part of his and Ellie's life in ways he never would have predicted that snowy morning in the lobby. 2 years after the sale, Charlotte stepped down as CEO of Vail Industries. Not because she was forced out, not because she failed, but because she'd finally figured out what mattered most. She took a position as director of Vail's community investment division, lower profile, lower pay, but actual meaningful work helping communities instead of extracting value from them. And it gave her time. Time for Sophie, time for herself, time to be a person instead of just an ambition. Richard became CEO and immediately tried to roll back some of the tenant protections. The board voted him down. The model was working too well, the PR value too significant. He was furious, but ultimately powerless. Charlotte kept her promise to Mason, kept consulting on Harrow Tower decisions, kept the tenant protections in place, kept showing up, and slowly, carefully, she rebuilt her relationship with Sophie. Went to every volleyball game, helped with homework, learned about dragons and fantasy novels and all the things her daughter cared about. Made mistakes and apologized for them. Showed up even when it was inconvenient. She and Marcus started co-parenting more effectively, even had civil conversations that didn't revolve entirely around logistics. Sophie noticed and bloomed under the reduced tension, Mason kept doing what he'd always done, working construction, managing his properties, raising Ellie. But now there were playdates with Sophie, weekend trips to museums with both girls, birthday parties, and school events where he and Charlotte ended up sitting together, two single parents navigating the same complicated territory. They never dated, never even discussed it. The relationship they had was too valuable to risk on romantic complications, but they were in each other's lives in ways that mattered. Emergency contacts, people who called when they needed advice, friends, ultimately, who'd earned that status through honesty and hard work. 3 years after the sale, Ellie asked Mason why he'd sold the tower. They were sitting on their couch on a Sunday morning, both still in pajamas, reading their respective books. She was 10 now, sharp and thoughtful, and already too smart for her own good. "Why do you ask?" Mason said, marking his place. "I was just thinking about it. How Grandpa Thomas built it, and you sold it. Do you regret it?" Mason thought about the question seriously. "No, I made the right choice." "How do you know?" "Because we're here, right now, reading together on a Sunday morning instead of me being at some meeting or dealing with some building emergency. That's how I know." "But you lost Grandpa's building." "I didn't lose it. I chose you over it. Different thing." Ellie processed this. Miss Charlotte kept her promises, though, about protecting the people. She did, still does. That's good, because if she hadn't, you would have been sad. Yeah, Jellybean, I would have been. But she changed, like you helped her change. She changed herself. I just gave her a reason to want to. Ellie went back to her book, but Mason could tell she was still thinking. After a few minutes, she said, "Daddy?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you chose me." Mason's throat went tight. "Me too, kid. Every single day." 5 years after the sale, Mason got an invitation to a wedding, not Charlotte's. She was still single, still focused on rebuilding her life. But James Kobayashi's granddaughter was getting married, and the whole event was being held at Harrow Tower in the renovated community space Charlotte had built. Mason brought Ellie, who was 12 now and mortally embarrassed by everything her father did. But even she was impressed by the wedding, the beautiful ceremony, the joy, the way 3 generations of Kobayashi family celebrated in a building that had almost pushed them out. Charlotte was there with Sophie, who'd grown into a confident 14-year-old with her mother's determination and her father's kindness. The 4 of them sat together during the ceremony, an unconventional family unit that somehow made sense. During the reception, Kobayashi sought Mason out. "Thank you," the old man said simply, "for selling to someone who kept her word. Thank Charlotte. She's the one who did the work. I thank you both. My family has been in this building for 35 years now, 3 generations, because of choices you both made." He smiled. "That matters." After he walked away, Charlotte appeared at Mason's elbow. "Did he just thank you for selling to me?" "Apparently." "That's ironic given how we started." "Yeah, well, people change. Situations change. Everything changes if you let it." Charlotte was quiet for a moment, watching the dancing. "I never properly thanked you, for that morning in the lobby." "You thanked me plenty." "No, I mean," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "for seeing something in me worth salvaging. Most people would have just written me off as another entitled CEO and moved on. You didn't. You held me accountable instead. That changed everything." "You changed everything. I just refused to let you off the hook. Same result either way." Charlotte smiled. "Sophie asked me the other day if you were her honorary uncle. I didn't know what to tell her." "What'd you say?" "That you were family in the ways that counted. Was that okay?" Mason looked at Ellie and Sophie laughing together at something on Sophie's phone, at the community Charlotte had built, at the building his father had bought and he'd sold, and that now housed moments like this. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's okay." "Good. Because you are. Both of you. You're part of our family now whether you planned on it or not." "Didn't plan on any of this." Best things usually aren't planned. They stood together watching the celebration, 2 people who'd started in the worst possible way and somehow ended up here. Changed. Better. Not perfect. Neither of them would ever be perfect. But trying. Always trying. And maybe that was the real lesson. Not that people could transform completely into some idealized version of themselves, but that they could wake up every morning and choose to be slightly better than they were yesterday. Could make mistakes and apologize for them. could hurt people and work to make it right, could spill coffee on a stranger and have it change their entire life. Mason thought about his father sometimes, about what Thomas would think of all this. Selling the tower, Charlotte's transformation, the strange family unit they'd all become. He thought Thomas would approve, not because the building had been preserved exactly as it was, but because the values had been. Taking care of people, keeping promises, building something that mattered more than money. That was the legacy worth keeping. As the reception wound down and Ellie started yawning, Mason collected their things and said goodbye to Charlotte and Sophie. "Same time next week?" Charlotte asked. "The girls want to go to that new science museum." "We'll be there." "Thanks, Mason, for everything. Still, always." "Stop thanking me." "Never." He smiled and took Ellie's hand. They walked out of Harrow Tower into the Chicago night, the building lit up behind them like a beacon. Ellie looked back at it. "It's pretty." "Yeah, it is. Do you miss owning it?" "Sometimes, but I wouldn't trade what we have now for anything. Not even for a really big building. Not even for 100 really big buildings." "Good. Because I like our life." "Me too, Jellybean. Me too." They drove home through the city, past buildings Thomas had owned and ones he'd never seen, through neighborhoods that had changed and ones that hadn't, under a sky that held no judgment, only stars. And somewhere in all of it, in the choices made and the promises kept, in the mistakes and the amends, in the collision that changed everything, was a truth Mason had learned and Charlotte was still learning. That who you become matters more than who you were. That change is possible if you're willing to do the work. That the hardest thing and the right thing are usually the same thing. And that sometimes, in the absolute worst moments, you meet exactly the person you need to meet. Even if they spill coffee on you first.